All right, and first item then, members, is just to confirm the issues around the Invest NI.
Has been discussed this week.
Oh, members won't be here at these days. Really? Their numbers, you know. I think so. Right, we'll deal with the forward work programme first of all just then, and to incorporate into that then, there's a suggested letter from, or suggested trade trip from Invest NI, and this has been part of an ongoing, long-standing arrangement with Invest NI. As we know, they said they'd come back to us and give us a projected suitable time for a visit to Trade Mission, and there is one there travelling to a major life sciences exhibition called Bio. So, members agreed that we involve ourselves in this. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, and that we explore the possibility of broadening the scope of the trip. Yeah.
And then, in terms of composition of the delegation, one member from each party.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, can I suggest that we get Assembly Research to liaise with Invest NI on that?
That's, yes, to get your point then, Mitchell, get Assembly Research to liaise with Invest NI and see what other potential opportunities there might be, you know, to pick up on whenever the mission is out there.
Yeah, that's
okay,
good. Yep.
Read then. Now, apologies then, item number one. One apology has been received from Sander Overend, and Fergal McKinney rang me there to say he would be run a wee bit late and has to leave early. I think that's going to be an inevitability of things until we get past the 22nd of May, so there we are.
We're not here that day, Chair, no.
You're welcome to come if you want.
Could be. Next, agenda item number 2 is the draft minutes. Draft minutes of the meeting held the 10th of April are at page 5. Members content with the detail and accuracy of the minutes? Agreed?
Great, it's that long ago, Chair.
It is indeed, I know that. Chairperson's business. Now, papers are tabled for this item, but there's a draft letter to RBS. That's a tabled draft letter to RBS. Following the Ulster Bank briefing to ourselves on the 10th of April, the committee agreed to write to RBS outlining the key issues as discussed. So, if members have any comments, are they content with the draft letter as proposed to send to RBS? Agreed?
Agreed.
And as well as that, I think it would be appropriate, just given the input that there was from them, to forward that letter to excuse me, the IBOA and to copy them into any subsequent correspondence that we might have.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Right. Then the next item is the current status of legal advice regarding Tamboran. The committee had agreed to request legal advice. This is legal advice from the Assembly legal advice people, our legal services people, in regard to the decision by DETI to extend Tamboran's licence by 6 months. Apparently, legal services are still looking at the issue, and in order to provide a comprehensive response to the committee, have requested a short extension. And the advice will be available in time for our meeting next week. Excuse me. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And the request for a copy of the Tamboran presentation. A member of the public has requested a copy of the slides presented by Tamboran when it briefed the committee on the 20th of June 2012. So, if members are content, if we have those still, to forward the copies of the slides as requested. Agreed? Agreed.
I presume on the committee page of the Assembly website, are they?
No.
They are there, certainly, yes.
Are they?
Where's it? Who asked for it?
Okay.
Chairman, who asked for it? Who asked for the information?
Do we know?
I forget, it was just an individual.
I'm sure
it wasn't an
details
organisation.
you want.
Now, they're regarded now as public documents if they're presented to us. I mean,
They are, yes.
there's no issue of confidentiality or
And all
business.
records are held going back, so
Yeah,
they're
okay.
definitely
Good
there.
enough.
They're already on the website now.
Next item is Utility Regulator Supplier Code of Practice Consultation. Utility Regulator has issued a consultation on the implementation of Energy Supplier Codes of Practice. Consultation was issued to members yesterday afternoon. So, unless members have any comments presently, if we're content to ask the Utility Regulator to provide a summary of responses to the committee following consultation. Agreed?
What's it?
Just say, are we agreed with that? First of all,
Yeah,
before we come to you, Phil.
At the bottom of that, there was also a notification that a workshop would take place. Can we make sure that the regulator invite members of the committee to that? And if we can't make it, maybe we'll agree to send a researcher.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, then, we have both myself and yourself, Phil, have received invites to the Balmoral show on Thursday, the 15th of May, from Sainsbury's to a reception which is holding from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. And I've also received an invite from the Ulster Bank for a lunch it's hosting at the Balmoral show from 11:45 till 2 p.m. That's on the 15th, Thursday the 15th. So I think I'll be able to get to the Ulster Bank event okay. I think maybe it might be snappy enough as to whether I can attend the other Sainsbury's one as well. Could be tricky enough getting to that one. So if members are content that I attend in my capacity as chair, and anyone else who's interested in the Sainsbury's, I'm sure you may well have got individual invites to those too, but anybody else that's interested in attending those, if they could just inform the committee clerk. Great.
Great.
Thank you. Now, the next item is the Barossa Desk Officer's Report. During the committee meeting of the 3rd of April, the committee had asked that DETI consider how information received by it from the Barossa Desk Officers can best be passed to the committee. DETI has advised that the officials wish to discuss this matter with the European Liaison Officers, new name for the desk officers, given that Barossa is going. So, and as the officer had just been appointed on the 10th of April, which sounds a wee bit odd to me, since I think most of them have already been there for a couple of years. And they've been appointed in new names anyway, new post names, and are apparently entering a position of transition. They have requested an extension to the end of June, when they'll be able to provide more accurate response. I think coming to the end of June, there's a potential there to run right into recess, and I wouldn't suggest for 1 minute that this date was deliberately chosen, the end of June, but nevertheless, I think it should be emphasised that we want it for the end, for the final meeting that we have in June, if at all conceivably possible.
Which is what, the 30th? What's that week anyway, isn't it?
I think
Our
so.
final meeting?
The 3rd of July, I think. Is
Third of-
Is that what it is? Yeah.
I think we would want the meeting before that.
The meeting before that would be a fortnight before that, Chair,
Right.
because of the visit in between from the 23rd to the 26th.
Well, I think if we draw an extension to the final meeting of June, to allow them, many of them are well in place now, and they've been in place 2 years, so they know really what they're at. It's just got a different name now. You know? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's
So
not
that
how you
would be
do it,
19th of June, I
Yep.
think it is, Chair. yeah.
And as well as that, given the issue that has been plaguing this place with actually getting information, there's information flowing, but we don't know where it's flowing to. It might be helpful if we got an update from whoever's involved at OFMD, FM, as to what the communication strategy is, if they have one, in regard to the dissemination of information, not just to ourselves as an assembly committee, but indeed to the wider public, be those stakeholders, individuals or businesses, whatever, to get access to this information that is apparently flowing from Brussels, but we don't seem to be able to get it. So agreed?
Great. Great.
Thank you. Next is, yes, the European Advisory Panel on Horizon 2020. The Committee for the Office of First and Deputy First Minister was to hold a European Advisory Panel on Horizon 2020 on Tuesday the 6th of May in the Senate. This has been postponed at the Department's request because the target for Horizon 2020 hasn't yet been agreed. So if we're content that the Committee for the Office of First and Deputy First Minister inform this committee when the event will be happening in the future. Okay, thank you. Now, the next item is agenda item number 4, which is the oral briefing from NIREG, Electricity Policy Review Part 3, Grid Connections. And this will be on page 13. And this item of business will be covered by Hansard, so electronic devices with the exception of assembly tablet. Those include electronic devices held by members of the public, should be switched off as they may interfere with the recording system. In addition, just members, please ensure that the assembly tablets have been switched to mute. Papers for this item are at page 13 and include the clerk's brief at page 14, a briefing paper from NIREG, page 16, and there's an additional brief from the clerk which applies to both this and the next oral briefing. Briefing committee today are Mr. Patrick McLuhan, who's the chair, Mr. Seamus Higgerty, the vice chair, Mr. Mervyn Adams, the GRID group chair, and Maeve Cormacan, policy and communications coordinator. You're all very welcome indeed, and thank you for coming to be with us here today. Now, and just to explain to you the nature of, you should be well enough versed in these matters anyway, but the nature of you've up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. We've already received your papers and thank you for those, so members have already perused those. You've up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, then we'll have the Q&A session, and I know there are 4 of you here today, so if you could please, we don't require 4 answers to each individual question. I'm sure you have different specialisms in your own fields, so if the person who's specialising in one particular area that the question is about could answer that, please. It makes for a more efficient meeting, and it allows us to explore more detail with you, which I'm sure you would want done too, within the restraints that we have on us time-wise. So, is it yourself, Mr. McLuhan?
Yes, sure, yeah.
That's making the... So, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much
continue.
to the Chair and Committee for taking the time to take our presentation today. We certainly welcome the Committee's interest into the issue of grid connection policy. And just start off with explaining a little bit about NIREG. NIREG stands for the Northern Ireland Renewable Industry Group, and we represent developers within the renewable sector in Northern Ireland. We promote responsible development of renewable energy, which allows Northern Ireland to benefit from the reduction on our reliance of imported fossil fuels required for conventional electricity generation. Today, I'd like to stress the importance of grid to the development of renewables. Renewable electricity needs to be connected and distributed to where it is needed. And to do this, we need the appropriate network infrastructure and policy. The grid is now over 40 years old and obviously needs to be repaired and updated. This work is not solely to allow connection of more renewable energy. This is often a common misconception. NIREG believes that it is in everyone's interest that Northern Ireland is seen to be very attractive to investment, and this will require a stable regulatory regime and a timely and efficient delivery of key infrastructure, which includes interconnectors. And this in turn then requires a coordinated and supportive response from all stakeholders involved. So again, we're very glad to be here to answer any questions which you might have, but I'm going to hand over to Maeve now at this stage, who's our policy coordinator in Northern Ireland.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks again to the committee for allowing us to present today. I'll just very briefly go a step backwards, I suppose, and give a bit of an overview in terms of renewables and why renewables, given that is the sector we represent. I think it's widely recognised that globally that action does need to be taken on climate change and on carbon emissions, and I don't think there's any real disagreement as the need to reduce our reliance on single sources of energy and increase our diversity and security of supply. Policy across Europe, in the UK and specifically in Northern Ireland, is very much towards building a more diverse and sustainable electricity supply, which effectively will mean more electricity coming from renewables. Northern Ireland has some of the best wind resources in Europe, and that's certainly something that we're keen to continue to develop. We're, I think, hitting about 18% of our electricity is coming from renewables at the moment, of which 14% is large-scale onshore wind. We are absolutely confident that with the right policy framework and with the right kind of commitment, we can hit our strategic energy framework targets of 40% renewables by 2020. And indeed beyond. We know that we don't have formal targets yet in place for 2030 and beyond, but we do believe that there is progress that can be made after the 40%. We're very much reliant on imported fossil fuels, and we believe that renewables can act as a hedge against kind of volatile fossil fuel prices. It's, as I said, we think we can make our targets if we have the right kind of approach. There are a lot of uncertainties out there, and I suppose while this particular review is looking at grid connection, I'll just very briefly talk about some other uncertainties and then hand over to Seamus. But the committee will be aware that there's a lot of uncertainty within the planning and local government side of things for renewables. Planning policy is being pulled together under one single strategic planning policy statement. We have local government reform, so as of 2015, we as a sector aren't entirely sure who will be making decisions on large-scale wind applications going forward. There is an inquiry being carried out by the Environment Committee, which recently closed its call for evidence into wind energy. So there's a lot of movement and change happening within the planning and local government side of things. And I'll hand over to Seamus now to give a very short indication of markets before Mervyn takes us into grid connection. Thank you.
Good morning, and once again, many thanks for this opportunity to come and have this presentation. As well as being Vice Chair, I also look after the Markets Committee within IRIG, and I'm aware the committee has already considered some of the market aspects of electricity and its review of electricity prices. But there really are two key changes coming. The first of all would be the change from the Renewable Obligation Support Mechanism into a FIT with CFD, and that being introduced in 2016, with the renewable obligation disappearing from the 31st of March 2017. That was a big concern, primarily from investors now who are looking at projects, and one of the aspects they look at is the revenue returns on projects, and they look at the difference between what is an existing ROC regime to what would be an EMR FIT with CFD regime. And the issues being is, the key one is there's a certain amount of money allocated in the levy control framework, and it really is that budget allocation that will be there for Northern Ireland developers. How that whole contract allocation pans out, and as well as that, because we're going into an auction type scenario for contracts, then there's contract price uncertainty as well. And as well as that, the key second thing is the introduction of the ISEM in December 2016, where we have an existing electricity market, single electricity market, which is a mandatory pool market, which has, in our opinion, has been very effective in reducing the cost of electricity and the transparency in that cost of electricity to all parties in the island of Ireland. That comes in December 2016, and it's changing the same to align with the EU target model. And it's that uncertainty as well on what option is going to be the outcome of that, and how that aligns itself with the new introduction of the EMR FIT with CFD in 2017. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for that.
Sorry, we'll have a full section on grid connection now from Mervyn. That's all right?
Oh, right. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
I'll make this quite brief and just sort of hit bullet points, because I know there's a lot of sort of weighty stuff within grid connection. So just going down the bullet points, and this is like a wish list from the industry. I think firstly, we'd like to see cross-party support for the decarbonisation of the industry in Northern Ireland and the use of renewables in the long term to support that. I think that was underscored by the recent IPCC findings. In the past, there was a Central Coordination Committee, the CEDWIG Committee, which looked at the policy side of it and the strategy. That really hasn't been active, and we feel strongly that you need that coordination group looking at the strategy going forward if we're going to be successful in achieving our targets. Again, supporting achievement of those targets and a unified vision. We need the Dirty Energy Bill. We need the Grid 25 documents from SONI and the NIE, so that there's a coordinated plan that everyone can sign on to. There has been interim plans and medium-term plans in place which have been going forward. However, the policy-making process is wrapped around those. have been slow in the extreme. There was a recent hiatus of about 2-3 years while support mechanisms were put in place for what's called cluster connections, which are single point connections to avoid proliferation of overhead lines. I think it would be fair to say we're sitting with 500 odd megawatts connected at the moment. If that hiatus hadn't occurred, we'd probably be sitting with closer to 800 connected at the moment. So there's a legacy of issues there for large scale. I think what's very focal at the minute is the proliferation of small scale, both single turbines and farms, rooftop PV. They're now looking at commercial rooftop PV, and all this has come into being post the RP5 application by NIE to the regulator for funding. So there's no mechanisms for funding or support for strengthening for those small scale developments, and I think that's something that's missing at the moment and needs to be brought forwards. There's some issues that would help that. Contestability is one of them, the ability of the developers to carry out some of the construction works themselves. It is in place in the south of Ireland, it is in place in the mainland UK, and it's on the forward work plan of the regulator, but it needs to be one of the focused items that they're looking at. Also the use of innovation, smart grid stuff that gets so technical sometimes my eyes just glaze over when I hear the guys talking about it, but there are solutions there that bring forward cost-effective connections. But again, it needs the support behind it to allow NIE, Sony, all the various players to go ahead and do that. So that's a quick run through sort of headline points. Patrick will maybe just close off in terms of the presentation, and we'll take questions there.
Thanks, Mervyn. So I'm sure you can garner our position on many things, and certainly very willing to engage the committee across all aspects of this. We represent small, medium and large wind developers in Northern Ireland, and whether it's an issue on the 11 kV network or up onto transmission, we, as I said at the start, would require everybody to take a very interested role in assisting us with the delivery of suitable grid connection policy. We really need to utilise the fantastic wind regime we have in Northern Ireland and make the most out of it, and make it as attractive as possible to investment, which is currently leaving a legacy of benefit. And we look forward to handling your questions.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that. Just a couple of 3 wee things. I was going to raise them during the course of it anyway, but you've raised them for me, and thank you for that. Sedwick, could you just outline to me what you feel is missing since it's no longer there, and why should it be reintroduced? Just whoever.
My understanding is that Sedwig was formed a number of years ago. It subsequently had a grid subgroup which was to look at strategic grid issues and hasn't met now for possibly a couple of years. NIRIG has, in the last year and a half, asked for better coordination on grid infrastructure and grid development, and the regulator, NIE, Sony and indeed DEDI have agreed that further better coordination is required. So there's now a renewables grid liaison group which was formed towards the end of 2012, which meets every couple of months and which discusses operational policy. So that we feel that has made a difference in that we can now sit in a meeting with all the key stakeholders on grid connection policy and talk about issues, talk about policies as they're coming down the line, rather than, say, going individually to Sony to talk about something that we may then subsequently need to talk to the regulator about. But that particular group, the Grid Liaison Group, is very specifically looking at operational issues.
Right.
It doesn't have a strategic output. One specific issue would be, for example, NIE's Network 25 strategy, which we know is under development and should be coming forward, we hope this year. We're not exactly sure when. But we would have a question around, for example, who is buying into this policy, what level of support the government departments are providing to that particular strategy when it is published. We think CEDWIG would be an appropriate forum for that. And I think CEDWIG, as a grouping, is of vital importance now because we have a Strategic Energy Framework review coming up in 2015. We're aware that there are 5 government departments at least involved in energy, plus all the network operators and builders and regulators. The original Strategic Energy Framework had outlined the need for strategic grid investment. The regulator at the time said in their response to the draft SEF that they would welcome guidance from DETI on strategic grid infrastructure. We're just not entirely sure how that comes about, and we think that given that there is a review coming up in 2015 of the SEF, now is the time to be reforming a group to allow that coordination. Coordination really is a key word, because there are issues that there are policy decisions that NIE makes that have an impact upon DOE policy, and we think that those players need to be in the same room at a certain level to discuss that.
Right, thank you for that. Then, contestability, you mentioned it there.
Yes.
Now, could you expand a wee bit on that for me, just as to what that and its outworkings means, please?
Right. Contestability can cover a wide range. And the larger connections, the large wind farms, it could potentially be the building of a 33,000 volt line from point A to NIE's connection point B. At the moment, that can solely be built by the NIE, the system operator, and other jurisdictions. That can be built by the developer. He can use resources that he maybe already has on site to do electrical works around the site. He can do it in a timely manner to fit in with the site development and then present it to NIE and say, I'm ready for connection. So it can speed the whole process up. It can be demonstrated that it's more cost effective. It's not always more cost effective, especially as you go up the voltage levels, because it gets more technically complex, and the likes of NIE and Sony have those concentration of those technical people that can deliver that. At the other end of the scale, the small developers, it could potentially involve them creating their own substation and then just saying to NIE, please connect my substation, and I have a single turbine and they attached to the other end of it. So again, it's more the packaged approach that the developer has control of.
And what's preventing that happening now? Just
There needs to be changes in the licence structure for NIE and for Sony. There's a limited amount of contestability can take place in Sony within the transmission arena, but there's practically none in the NIE arena. So they need their licence changes. Before that can be done, there has to be a detailed process put in place. Now, we have suggested that there's no point reinventing the wheel. The south of Ireland have a process. UK.
Can you maybe explain to me process? What do you mean by that? A process with whom, or
right?
What way is that?
The processes, they're mostly involved in around once the developer would construct the asset, whatever it be, a substation or a line. Once that's connected to the NIE system, it becomes so integral to the NIE system that the NIE adopt that and maintain it along with the rest of their things. So it has to be constructed to a certain standard, quality, tested, all that. So the processes involve the specification that's given out to the person, build it to this specification, the testing and taking over of it post-construction by NIE so that they can comfortably own this asset for the next 30 years, whatever the lifetime of it is. So it's those specifications and processes that need to be put in place to enable this.
And is that a legal thing, or is it just an agreement for an individual undertaking that you're taking, or individual site, or what is it? Is it?
It's a legal status. Plus, the first step is to get the capability included within the licence agreement.
Right.
So you need the licence sorted out. Then, when you get an individual case coming forwards, this legal agreement is made between the party who wants to build and NIE.
It's exactly the same situation where you have a house building developer who then builds a road and DOE adopts
I know
it.
the adoption.
So it's already available.
Very, very similar.
Different guys, yeah.
And just in terms of, I can hear the efficiency thing because we've heard that from other people before. In terms of costings, projected costing,
Yeah.
do you feel that that would make much more, aside from we'll park the efficiency bit and getting things done quicker, because that's a regular complaint we hear. The costings then?
The costings, will be up front, some of them can be marginal. And the higher up you get in the voltage level, my personal estimation is that the more marginal the costs get.
Right.
When you're down the voltage level, there are a large number of operators out there who are capable of building that sort of thing. And a lot of them are looking for work at the minute with the downturn in construction industry, everything else. So it's a highly competitive area. So there are distinct cost advantages that could be had there. In terms of an overall cost for the development, if you can reach completion at an earlier date, your overall development costs are beneficial as well. And that's really the speed thing, but there are cost benefits associated with the speed.
Okay, that's grand, thank you. Mr. Dunn, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, folks, for coming in this morning. Could you clarify who you represent? Is it mainly the large-scale providers, or is it everyone across the board that you represent?
We represent the wind, wave and tidal sector.
Tend to be the larger providers.
Well, I suppose historically, development in Northern Ireland would have been large-scale onshore wind development.
Yes,
And maybe our historic, when NIRIG was formed about 4 years ago, the bulk of our membership would have been large-scale onshore developers, but we now represent a number of the small-scale developers as well as offshore wind and the tidal developers who have leases.
Okay. The time taken to, the lead-in time for projects obviously can be quite extensive. It's something we hear a lot about. Planning permission comes up regularly, and the reluctance of NIE to get involved until planning permission is in place. What's your opinion about that? Certainly a lot of the providers, we feel that the planners and NIE should be working in parallel. What's your opinion on that?
That was subject to some discussion before it was brought in by NIE with the industry, and by and large the industry agree with it. What it does is it prevents what's called the reservation of capacity. And they had this problem in the south of Ireland with the Gate 1 and Gate 2 projects, whereby projects that didn't have planning permission were assigned grid capacity and maybe subsequently didn't get their planning permission. So there's an active market down south in grid capacity. They're selling something that has been promised to them they never actually had. The thing that makes it worse for Northern Ireland is the small size of our system. A few reserve capacity for projects that are fictitious in some way and that they don't have their planning, then that has a greater impact because the overall system is smaller. If we look at the history of pre- and post-planning applications, there are substantial reductions post-planning. Number of turbines reduced, size of turbines reduced, various things like that. So if you had the system where you just went in with the planning application, MEC or maximum export capacity, you could very well be sitting thinking that grid capacity is full, but in reality it's not. So we support the requirement for planning.
Fully? Yeah.
Yes, we would like to see the process working quicker. We think there's too many delays and turnaround times and too slow in getting quotations back out. But the principle we do support.
And just to add to that, I mean, Mervyn's mentioned speed. I think it's definitely an area that's maybe being felt more in the small scale sectors due to the sheer number of applications that are coming through. But I think it's a sense now of if developers can get a much earlier indication of what the budget might look like, because I know that this has changed significantly in the last 18 months, and I think I'm sure the members of the committee have heard this before, but the sheer volumes coming forward and the impact that's having on the grid connection costs. It's meant that a number of sites which would have been chosen for their wind speeds are now seen as not viable because of the grid connection costs. I think developers would like to know earlier whether it's worth their while getting planning permission. But I think there is also a move perhaps to look at grid connection is better rather than necessarily where the best wind speeds are. But planning is still, I think it has worked for the industry in advance. If it was just that bit easier to get early information on costs.
Just a matter of interest, does NIA give advice, technical advice prior to the planning approval? Will they give that initially?
They will give what they call a desktop estimate, which is non-binding on NIE's behalf. So whatever the outcome is, saying you need correspondence of line, whatever, if those change by the time you get your planning come forward, there's nothing binding about that original. We've actually been party to discussions with NIE with the small developers arena and a focus group with them, and we're trying to reach an agreement with them to provide 2-week turnaround budget estimates at an early stage, which will give smaller developer an idea, should I chase this one or
Is that given free?
There may be a charge. We don't know yet. But we're saying if there's going to be a charge, it has to be substantially less than what they're charging at the moment for a feasibility study.
It has to be fair and equitable, but it also just gives that parameter to the developer to input that into their model to see if that site is worth developing. And it's a simple fix in some regard.
Is this the aspect you're talking about, more resources should be put into NIA to help the smaller developer?
Well,
I talked about that.
Very, very much so. All the information is there. They have the 11 kV circuits. They know exactly what load is on these 11 kV circuits. They know the construction of the 11 kV circuits. They know what megawatts can be put on. So as Mervyn suggested, to me a 2-week turnaround is not. It's very practical, but I agree with you. I do not think they would have the resources for the volume that that has been made application to, and that's why the 2 weeks is not happening. It's 2 months.
We are chasing another. It's not a solution, but something that will help, and it would probably only help for the larger scale, small scale developers. So the people who are looking at groups of these, and it would also benefit the large scale as well. We're asking for access to the NIE graphical information system. Because we all have our own graphical information system, so if we had the overlay of where the lines were, where the substations is, ourselves, the more technical minded of the small scale developers can do their own studies and reach their own conclusions. And not only does that allow them to make their own decisions, it allows them to challenge NIE decisions if they decide to go on ahead and they don't totally agree with NIE's coming forward with.
I suppose I know this may be quite a long answer to that question, but I would maybe take it back again to the issue of coordination, because NIE will make decisions based on the resources that they have available, which is a regulatory decision. The amount of resources required by NIE will depend on the amount of, certainly one element of that will be the type and the amount of renewables coming forward. And we do have a significant number of small-scale generators coming forward for connection, which in turn has been kind of supported by a policy put in place by DETI. So you do have different players here. I know that certainly in the last couple of years, maybe straightforward answers on investment haven't been that easy, because we have been waiting for the fifth price control, RP5, for NIE, and that's only concluded very recently, 2 weeks, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then even on large scale, the implementation of DS3 and programmes such as this that will certainly enhance and allow more renewable generation to come onto the grid. We're waiting on a decision in relation to that aspect in particular, but for small, medium, large, there are things that could be done to
Move it on.
assist and move us on.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gordon. Just one thing, I'm not quite sure about this. NIE requires developers to have planning permission in place before they'll even go the route of giving a quotation. Now, depending on who you're talking about, a lot of the developers are saying to me they can't understand the rationale, the reason behind that, why that there can't be a parallel or a twin track approach now. You've taken us a sort of a direction there. I'm just wondering what your take is on that, because I'm hearing from people that that's a big issue and that that's contributing further to delays and going from point application to point conclusion. So what's your take on that, just? And all I need is just one answer, please, if you could just...
If it was fair and equitable to all our members, we're happy to see that parallel approach.
Sorry, what does that mean, if it was fair and equitable?
If it doesn't hoard the export capacity, so if you're not hoarding megawatts, so if somebody didn't have their planning permission but they had a grid application for X amount of megawatts and they never intended to carry out their planning application, that would be taken out of availability for other generators to utilise. So
sorry, I just don't quite get that. If both applications are made simultaneously and a simultaneous process is run in parallel,
yes,
I don't understand how one can affect the other if the main thing is to get both going concurrently. As and when, and we've heard from others in the renewable sector that over in Britain, that's exactly what is done, and it doesn't seem to be presenting any sort of difficulty.
I totally agree. It goes back to the original point about it as long as it's fair and equitable, so that when the developer does receive his planning permission, that the grid connection arrives at exactly the same time, or the opportunity to connect arrives at the same time.
Yes.
I think, I know you asked only one answer, but I think that's part of the problem. There's a 3-month period in which NIE are obliged to provide a connection offer by planning permission. I mean, worst case scenario historically is looking at 7 years for a large scale project. So while applications might be made at the same time, determinations may be years apart. So it can only be a parallel process so far.
How could they be years apart?
You might get a grid connection offer, at which point you're kind of locked into that that particular number of megawatts, but you're still awaiting planning permission, and that may end up going to planning appeals. It might be 1 year, 2 year, or 4 years. So
But is that not a business call at that point, rather than a reason for not doing it that way?
Well, it's something that the terms of reference of what you're suggesting could deal with, and in the eventuality that you didn't get, then your capacity that was allocated could go back to you, or go back into the system for sort of open bidding, so to speak. But like Me's point has resonance, whereby if something from a planning perspective is delayed for a period of time, then it also affects the megawattage that have been allocated to that applicant. And the other thing I think to take into context is our planning system, and not to delve into that area too deeply, but from some point we have the unique project splitting aspect in Northern Ireland, where sometimes applicants are challenged on you decided to split a project, you didn't consider grid in your application and things like that. So there are a few things that would need to be sorted out, and again, as long as it's all fair and equitable, we would have no issue at all with running
those few things being just, you refer to a few things needing to be sorted out. What would you say those are?
Well, in relation to, well, the project splitting is one aspect of it from a planning perspective, where you could be seen to have carried out a planning application without considering the grid application route.
Yes.
Then if NIE give you a different route to the one that you had imagined you were going to get, again, it's open for further scrutiny and challenge. So everybody just needs to arrive at the same point. But all the decisions that involve the statutory stakeholders and authorities need to be robust and not going to be affected by challenge.
Okay. Well, you can never prevent against something that's affected by challenge. There's always courts and all sorts of things around the place to protect interests as well. So, okay, Mr. Flanagan, Phil.
Thanks, Patsy, and thanks for the presentation. I want to establish whether the current system is fit for purpose. Is it working?
In terms of the grid that's actually out there?
No,
or
not the actual grid, the process of grid connection.
The process for grid connection. I would say a reserved yes. I think predominantly in the small wind arena, the volume of applications that NIE is getting at the moment, and they're trying to treat them in an equitable way that they have established against the background of large-scale applications. So they're getting a region of 60 applications a month, and they're trying to deal with these in the same way and create a grid connection queue that means that the people go on in the sequence that they make their approaches. And it's not working. They're taking at least their full 90 days to come back with the offer to the people. Those people have committed a lot of money into it at that stage and are then finding out at a very late date that there's this astronomical connection charge. So in that arena, that's why we want to see these budget costs up front, provision of the grid information to the developers so that they can do their own calculations to avoid those late shocks.
So what's the current situation with grid connections? Is it done on a purely first come, first served basis, or is it done the process based on who's easiest to connect to the grid or who's bringing the most megawatts in any given time?
It's basically done on application date.
Okay.
Right? And the reason for that is as soon as the agreement is firmed up between NIE and the other party, be it large or small scale, we're going to connect you there and here's your offer. You pay. That's a contract. So what they do is plug the capacity into all subsequent calculations. So on the small scale, if there's one circuit that can accept 4 small turbines maximum, number 1 will take up slot 1 and so on down to slot 4. Now, if we hadn't the planning permission thing, those 4 might not have planning permission. A 5th one might come in with planning permission and they'd say, oh, we're full. But those 4 might never get planning permission. So the circuit... but to do the calculations, NIE have to go on that date order.
Okay. No, I understand what you're saying about the parallel process, and that makes some sense. But in terms of NIE providing developers with a rough figure, that's something that you would endorse?
Yes.
Very
Totally.
much so.
Okay.
And some we're actively chasing for.
And what surety can be given to developers that that's actually a figure that NIE won't triple or quadruple just because they get the notion of doing it?
It would have to be in layers, so to speak, so you'd be capturing certain areas within which you could hit. But the caveat, there would be a disclaimer attached to it, I would imagine.
Okay. Well, one of the big problems I see at the minute with NIE's policy of grid connection is the complete lack of transparency about their process, about their methodology and about their decision making. And they can make any decision they want without having to provide a rationale to the developer or the person making the grid connection. Is that something that needs to be sorted out as part of this process?
Well, there's the statement of charges that is publicly available, will allow you to see how much they charge for various items, but I don't know, Mervyn, if you can elaborate, or me maybe.
I say the statement of charges do help. We're led to believe, imminently going to issue for consultation their planning procedures documents, and they're rewriting those at the moment, and that will help. We have found that they've been very open to discussion on issues associated with connections. So if we felt a particular offer had something in it that we didn't agree with, we have always been able to go back in and talk to them. I do fully appreciate that the volume thing are referred to in the small scale that's there at the moment maybe prohibits that at that level, and there is an issue at that level.
So do you think the statement of charges is a good enough system, or do you have any feeling that NIE are profiteering at the minute with regards to grid connections?
I don't think they're profiteering. I do think they are playing on the safe side. Their design criteria that they plan to as maximum generation and minimum load. Now, that's not always going to be the truth. Sometimes the generation will be consumed at the point of generation and not even out onto the circuit. But to move away from that basic principle, they need the smart grid solutions employed, referred to earlier.
Sorry, Mick, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think there is quite a lot of frustration out there, and there's a number of factors for that, and this issue of high number of small-scale connections, and then the impact upon the capacity of the grid is one of the major ones. But I would highlight that we're in a time of really significant change in the energy sector generally, electricity sector particularly. The system is trying to cope with demands that were never envisaged when it was built out 40, 50, 60 years ago. The policies that are in place, whether written down or not written down, need work. They need to be upgraded, they need to be developed, and they need to take into account the diverse ranges of energy sources that are going to be coming onto the system, as well as the fact that we're a very limited market in Northern Ireland, and we need to make sure that we're interconnecting, we're exporting when possible. We need to maximise the use of the grid. So there is this period of time, and I do think we're in the middle of it, where there's massive change, to be honest, taking place. Grid policy is changing. There's initiatives happening all island. There's a DS3 project. There's initiatives taking place in the north, in the south, and even at a European level, network codes are changing. Against that background, we have NIE, the regulator, and Sony all trying to make the system work. We have certainly found all of those stakeholders to be approachable whenever we have had issues, both as an industry group and individually. I think as developers, probably my colleagues here would say, whenever there's an issue, we have found it possible to go in and sit down and talk to the stakeholders. So it's a difficult time, and we'd really like to see better coordination on things like policy. You know, who's making the policy, who's writing down the policy, and how do we all make sure that we're as happy as possible with a fair, equitable policy. Work does need to be done, but it's against that backdrop, as I say, of change happening on all fronts.
Again, Sedgwick would provide that strategic coordination to deal with the future. Yeah.
They provided it, or
no, if it was reformed, they could provide that.
And in terms of NIE's role, is the monopoly situation we have at the minute working effectively, or would developers prefer to see the introduction of either competition into the connection market or stronger regulation to provide greater transparency and accountability for NIE's decisions?
Seamus?
I would probably suggest that it would be the contestability aspect of it would be competition. As Mervyn said earlier, sometimes it's not just the marginal cost of the grid connection, it's the time frame delivery of that, which is more important to a developer. And certainly the statement of charges had been mentioned, and if you've looked at that, there's fairly broad items of equipment, cost per kilometre of overhead line, a cost of a substation. And from that, you know, a developer can take a view, you know, how far is the wind farm or the renewable generation source from the network. So, and take a particular route in kilometres, so they can have some sort of projection of what the costs are. But if you're saying for a change going forward and being fit for purpose, I think competition or contestability in where developers are afforded the opportunity to build their own infrastructure, and I think by that in itself should drive down the connection costs associated with the offer that you get in the first place.
And if that was the case, would developers be happy to sign up to an agreed standard level or level of standards that everybody would comply with?
Yeah,
Would have to.
well, that's the bottom line, because at the end of the day, we're aware that NI has to adopt and manage whatever we build. So that is a key thing in the process. They need to get their act together, get the specs out for the type of gear, as if they were going out to a tender, a third-party tender themselves, or third-party overhead line contractor or substation build. Put out a spec, and that's a spec that we would take, and we would engage third-party contractors to build it for us.
And in terms of NIE's modelling and planning standards, are they up to date? Because the way some people see it is NIE are financially rewarded to do capital works, and as a result of that leads to what many see as an ultra-conservative approach and more costly approaches to doing things. Is that something that you have seen in your experience?
I think
So, well, Mervyn, you maybe come in after. I think some of the issues that you're raising were issues that were raised throughout the process of RP5, and I think the Competition Commission has addressed some of those in its final determination on RP5. And you asked earlier about whether there was a need for greater regulation, and I know that was a question that maybe the regulator had during the process of the Competition Commission's determination. There appears to be, I haven't read all 750 pages, mea culpa, but certainly there are I have things to do, other things.
We'll give you 15 minutes, you like.
Okay, get to work. No, certainly from the executive summary, it does seem to be that the Competition Commission is recommending a different type of arrangement in terms of regulation. Now, I haven't really gone into the details of that yet, and as I say, maybe a bit of time needs to be set aside to look at that. But there is that movement. There was certainly a line or two within the Competition Commission determination that greater transparency would be welcome or should be an outcome. And I think, in terms of better, it's not so much more regulation, but better regulation or better kind of regulatory policies in terms of how NIE and the regulator interact in the coming years. But some of these things are perhaps issues that are slightly outside of our remit as an industry group.
I think you asked there, were they conservative in their approach? I think the answer is yes and no. They are conservative in their approach when they're giving you a quotation and they make these assumptions, at maximum generation, minimum demand. But they're not conservative in their overall approach. Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland in total are facing levels of renewable penetration that are unprecedented anywhere in Europe. On Christmas morning we had 51% instantaneous penetration of renewable energy into the system. So at system level they're dealing with it very well. Why we believe they're conservative at the individual quotation level is that they don't have the smart systems in place, they don't have the support mechanisms to enable them to install those smart systems. If they had those in place, it would give them more latitude at the quotation level.
And one of the conditions of RP5 was that NIE could apply to the regulator to invest or to allow investment in renewable projects.
Yeah.
Is that happening?
It is. For the small scale, there was, with the volume of applications that were coming in, NIE discovered that they had a problem that they weren't aware of before, and that the local transformers were designed to bring power down to the houses. You switch that and try and push power back through them.
The system, yeah.
They don't work. So they had to change elements of those transformers, tap changes, protection relays, everything. Now they have applied, and I'm not exactly sure of the figure, they identified 20 substations where they had to change protection so that they could do this reverse power flow, and were awarded an investment of, I think, 2.1 million, 2.3 to address those 20. Now,
I think it was 40 as well, according to our information.
well, what has happened? More applications, more substations have come into this we need work arena. And initially they went back to the regulator and said, can we swap this substation for that substation? And the answer was no, and understandably no, because the regulator was saying, but people have been promised as soon as that first substation was done, their conditionality will be removed. So you can't replace it with one just because it has 6 turbines connected instead of the 2 that are onto this one. So they're going through a process at the minute of trying to get more money to address more substations. So there is a process there, but it's slow.
Why is it slow?
Okay, could we just briefly answer, please? Just,
Yeah, right. It's slow because of the approval process that's in place between the regulator and the NIE. That's just
All right.
Okay,
That's it.
thanks for that. Mr. Anderson, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for coming along to the meeting today. Can we move to the grid investment? And maybe a few questions about how that's proceeding or not. Can I ask, is there a strategy in place for investment in the electricity grid?
Well, Marvin, go ahead.
NIE
on here.
have put forward a short-term, medium-term and a long-term plan. The long-term plan is called RIDIP, and it involves the development of a 275 high-voltage line to support predominantly the west of the province. They have proceeded very well. Short-term plan's complete. They are probably 75% of the way through their interim plan, and the last projects are identified and programmed to be done. But that takes you up to a ceiling of...
What's the timescales for those short-term, medium-term and long-term, Mervyn?
The medium-term plan should be complete by about 2017. And that will take you to an absolute ceiling of roughly 800 megawatts connected renewable energy. To go above that 800, you need elements of the long-term plan, the RIDIP plan, to be established to get the EHV, the extra high voltage 275, across to the west of the province. Now, they have identified their preferred option for stage 1 of that, which is along the southern boundary from the bottom of Loughney out towards Omagh. But it's a 275 overhead line. We all know the problems those have in getting planning permission, getting public consent, getting constructed. So we're setting in 2014. That's not going to happen within the window that we need it to happen, unless it is the full backing of all governments, all departments. You know, everybody has to get behind it if that's going to happen, or we're going to be sitting up against this.
And that's part of one of my questions as well. I was going to ask you for your view on the current strategic approach. That's what you're telling us here. I think that maybe will happen as...
Yeah, there's this lack of a roadmap that everybody's signed on to. There doesn't seem to be a joined up view of here's the long-term future. And I think part and parcel of that, even the regulatory process doesn't support that. It's a 5-year regulatory process, and we're looking at projects which have 10, 15 years lead in. So it's very hard for the regulator to approve those outside his 5-year window. So we need the background of a long-term plan that everybody's signed on to, and we're doing part A of it or part B of it, but everybody's still working towards the same long-term plan.
Do you see big issues there?
Yeah. There's huge issues in terms of public acceptability, where we're going with it. Are we going to hit the 40% target? Is 40% going to even be enough? You know.
And that's it. This is why we're here. You know, today the committee has been looking at these issues. We're here specifically on a grid connection renewables perspective. We know that there was a security of supply review, the first part on electricity pricing. I mean, one of the recommendations that maybe came out from the last part of the review was better coordination and, you know, suggestions that the Ministerial Council also take on board energy, you know, under its remit. Security of supply, I mean, energy is of such fundamental importance to society that we really do think that it needs to be really coordinated and kind of all players to be taking part in that. So the there is a role for each one of the stakeholders that maybe we've mentioned today. There's ourselves, there's NIE, there's Sony, there's the regulator, there's DETI, there's other government departments, but it is, security of supply is such a massive issue that I just think that we have to be coordinating it. And
So we're looking for this coordinated response that we talk about from
New
all
department,
these stakeholders.
well, I mean, we could sit here with maybe a wish list of what we'd really like to see happen, and we appreciate that government departments have significant responsibilities and pulled in different directions. But the fact that there was a coordination body previously maybe does imply that there would be a need for one again.
Negra State, talking about the smart network management, represents a very positive opportunity that must be accompanied by infrastructure, as you call it, build out. Is enough being done to put the appropriate infrastructure in place to make the most of the smart grid technology?
Back to Mervyn.
It seems to be the
Mervyn's a good one.
focus.
The smart grid and grid development go together, and to some extent smart grid offsets grid development. If you can get appropriate smart grid, especially at the lower voltages, 11,000 volts and 33,000 volts, you can maybe avoid capital investment. Now, if you're dealing with a fixed fund of monies available, as you always are, if you can avoid spending here, that will maybe allow you to increase or accelerate development somewhere else. So the two of them work hand in hand, they're complementary to each other. Does that answer your question?
When you say they go hand in hand, but the smart grid option, or the way you say, do you see that the way forward to maybe alleviate some of the problems that you see developing the other way?
It will give you immediate alleviation if you get the proper smart grids. Now, the smart grid can be a mixture of intelligent sampling of what are the current conditions on this line at the moment. So instead of this maximum generation, minimum load thing, you have a dynamic model that looks what's happening at the minute, let's work with that. But to back that up, you then need possibly installation of automated equipment at the substation, automated switches on the line to change line configurations to maximise what you can do. So the one will always point towards an investment requirement for hard equipment to back up the capability of the smart. That's a balancing act. Yeah.
Well, it's not an argument against doing it, because that's the direction of travel anyway.
That's the direction to travel. And to be honest, with the increased levels of penetration of renewables throughout the system, unless these smart solutions are enhanced,
built in from the start.
And built in from the start. The only other way to do it is to build your Rolls-Royce grid.
Right.
That'll take anything you throw at it. You know, and we can't
Take
afford
forever as well.
It'll take forever, and we can't afford to do that. You know, so it has to be this balance act.
Another couple, Chair, quick questions, just to, quickly. Putting the targets aside, is it appropriate to build high levels of renewable electricity generation before the grid is in place to support it?
So you mean permitted developments being erected and grid not available to take them?
Sorry,
Well, go ahead.
I'm just going to cut across there. It's a cart and horse. If you don't have if you wait until you have the grid before you build your renewables, then it'll be very hard to justify the grid in case you have stranded assets, in case a wind farm doesn't get built out. If you wait until you have your wind farm before you start a plan for grid, then you have a wind farm potentially or another renewable generation source sitting there for 10 years while the grid gets built. So, I don't think we can afford to wait for one. I don't think we can afford to wait for one to be built and then start the other. I think that's what we mean by strategic. If you intend to hit a 40% target, if you intend to increase renewables, then you have to intend to have the grid to match that, and you do need to work with both of those in parallel. maybe not answer you wanted to hear, but I know I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely in parallel. Yeah.
Just finally, I have to talk about the north-south interconnector and the Moyle interconnector. What other Pacific grid additions, reinforcements do you think are needed?
Sorry, before, no Mervyn will answer this, but we're also,
Mervyn.
we can also send through a lot more information after this session as well.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There'll be a lot of this stuff that we won't be able to cover today because of just time constraints.
Yeah.
So we'll submit the remainder of the questions to you whenever members are finished here today in writing, if that's okay for yourselves
that's
to
grand.
respond to that. That's grand. Thank you. If they are a
Just
bit,
quickly, yeah.
if you can respond quickly to this.
Just
and
before Mervyn answers, just on your last question, if the grid's not there, the investment is unlikely to go ahead. The wind project will not just get built.
You're saying what other grid investment? Obviously, the second north-south interconnector is critical, not just for renewables, but for system stability and for the decarbonisation targets associated with Valley Lumford and so on. The Moyle interconnector is running at sub-optimum level at the minute until repairs are done. Even once those repairs are done, the concentration of energy flow on the Scottish side will limit the capacity of it. So what we really need is more interconnection, potentially through the south of Ireland onto mainland continental Europe and to France, where there's a surfeit of nuclear energy, and you can get this balance between conventional and green. So we have a resource in terms of wind in this whole island, which is enviable across Europe. And if we can get that out to market, we'll all benefit from it.
That's the well, very quick, Chair, but that's the key is the vision. We can't lose sight of the vision. If we can interconnect into the market, we will be able to get rid of our product, so to speak. And that's more jobs on the ground, local supply chain opportunity, and a healthier economy coming from renewable energy.
Okay, right. Thank you for that. Mr. McLaughlin, Mitchell, I know you've been dipping in and out there. So
I know, I've been probably very well teased it. I'm interested in this kind of confusion. Everybody I ask is in favour of smart grid technology. So, where's the blockage? What's the problem?
The problem then is there's an acceptance level to go over in terms of the people within NE and what they're used to doing, which is running a safe system. And you can't say run the system unsafe because that's contrary to their licence, right? So they have to be comfortable that whatever smart solutions in front of them achieves what it's going to achieve, but still keeps the system safe. Now, the people selling these smart grid solutions will promise you our system does everything. You know, it's like the double glazing salesman. They're the best thing on God's earth. And then you get it and maybe discover it doesn't do A and B. So there's extensive testing. I would assume that as it comes in, NIE will adopt a trial approach. So they'll put one in, they'll get comfortable that it delivers everything it says it's going to deliver. They do exist, but they exist in small arenas. The islands of Scotland, for instance, have some of them attached, but they're dealing with a very small grid, and they can control it much easier. We're in the middle of, we have flows come across from the Moyle up and down south. Loads are going up and down. They haven't got all that variability in a small off-Scottish island.
But it's hardly large in the global or international context, is it?
No, it's not, but it does have these unprecedented penetration levels of wind. Nowhere else in Europe is approaching 50%.
Yeah, but I mean, is there, and that actually at the end of the day is the core of my line of question, because I actually see that as a significant impediment to the development of renewables. We don't know how to fit them in, we don't know how to connect, we don't know how to measure the capacity, we don't know how to project the potential accurately, and we don't know what to do with it even if we achieve that potential.
Well, there'll be some parts of that maybe we'd agree with, not all of that assessment. I think that I was at a conference recently where someone from the European Commission said Ireland is giving hope to parts of Europe who are seeing what can be done with high levels of wind, because there are countries in Europe who have perhaps higher levels of renewables as part of their electricity mix, but these are also countries which are extremely well interconnected. So they might have 1,000 megawatts of interconnection between, say, Belgium or the Netherlands to Germany to France, etc. So Ireland is, as an island, and I do have to talk about Ireland as an island because of the single electricity market, they are leading the way in terms of being able to absorb high levels of renewables, and particularly wind, which is where one of our greatest resources is, as a variable source of energy. So we have the ability to absorb 50% of instantaneous penetration, which is wind, onto our system. There is a programme in place, the DS3 programme, which is an all-island programme, which will aim to increase our wind penetration, variable penetration, to 75% at any one time, which is a phenomenal figure by anyone's standards. And so, you know, as an island, that kind of technology is fairly world-leading. So we do have an awful lot of the technological capability to use the wind resources and other renewable resources that we have. It's maybe not that easy a process, but then it wouldn't be, and it is taking a lot of time and effort. It's taking combined efforts of regulators north and south, of system operators north and south, and network builders north and south, as well as a lot of input from industry to say, look, this is what we are capable of. We can respond to your requirements as quickly as possible, and you know, we're very, as an island, we're fairly cutting edge. So recognise the challenges that you put forward there, but I also think that maybe it's not recognised what we have achieved to date as well.
But DS3 would be your solution. You know, it's designed to develop solutions to those very challenges. And if it's implemented, it's been delayed by a year, and if it's implemented, as Meva alluded, it will allow up to 75% of penetration.
Which is my first question. So what, in fact, is the cause of the delay? I mean, is there inertia at a policy level? Has it been driven or not?
As being driven, one of the main things to move that 50% threshold is the capability of the system to react to change of frequencies. So the DS3 programme has identified what needs to be done to achieve that in terms of changing protection settings, relays, everything else. But it has to be done right across the whole generation suite. So by conventional generators and by renewable generators. The conventional generators are big, huge, lumbrous machines, right? So their reaction times to stuff like that, the owners of them are saying we're uncertain how they will react to these changes. We need to do studies. We can't jeopardise the conventional generation plant to achieve this. We have to be sure that they can achieve it with no damage. So the time that has been granted has been a time for them to carry out tests and programmes on the conventional generation, so they can come back and say, yes, all generation can achieve these new limits.
Well, this is a big question. It's almost taking us into a whole theological discussion on it. I mean, the whole idea of renewables is to respond to the pressure on fossil fuel based generation. Yeah. So we are actually, in effect, at least hypothesising about replacing, fossil fuel generation with renewables. Anyway. So I don't know that we should be defending everything. We should, in fact, be encouraging a transition. Is that not the underlying logic of renewables?
Sorry, I mean, it is a transition, and we certainly as an industry wouldn't say that today we could run our
carry
entire
the
electricity
load,
system
yeah,
on
yeah,
renewables.
yeah.
I mean, there might be a time in the future when that happens, but it's not now. We need a diverse fuel mix. We're at 18% electricity from renewables, which is a really significant jump from where we were 5 years ago. There does need to be a balance. There's a need to reduce. I mean, again, the European Commission's open to have a report out in June trying to ask Europe what it can do to reduce its reliance on external energy sources, and it's directly driven by the events in Crimea, Ukraine and Russia. So people are very aware of our reliance on fossil fuels. The prices of those are volatile, and historically the trend is upwards. But there's also, you've kind of mentioned it there already, there's higher notions, there's global notions of climate change, of carbon emissions and the need to reduce those. And we do have obligations, legal obligations to reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. So they do all come together, and as I say, we wouldn't suggest that renewables are the only answer today, but they're definitely part of the answer.
Okay, we might need to come back to this. I don't have the time, whether the chair has the time, I don't, just to complete that, but it just seems to me that that in fact might be a contributory factor here, just to, you know, the protraction and the, in a sense, contributing just to how long it takes to get decisions to kind of affect and deliver change, and maybe it does need to be drilled down. Could we, you know, with the recent developments in relation to Bombardier, where they have this in-house generation plant, waste to energy, as they describe it, it does raise a question about, you know, the connection requirement to connect to the grid. And circumstances where perhaps generators are primarily interested in satisfying their own energy needs, and allegedly or otherwise doing it in an environmentally friendly way. But even for individual generators, many of the people that you're talking about, you know, the micro generators and whatever, do you have a formal view in relation, does the group have a formal view in relation to the requirement to connect to the grid at all?
We would increasingly advocate to our members that with problems associated with grid connections, that if that doesn't rule out that you can use renewable generation, you can do off-grid systems, especially within the farming community, and we would meet with the Farmers Union and talk to them about farmers using off-grid systems. Because let's not forget, part of the whole controlling our total energy needs, a large part of it is control of the demand side. So if you can suppress the demand side using off-grid generation, then it's all moving towards the big target.
And it seems to me, in theory at least, you know, and I don't claim to be an expert on this at all, but you know, in terms of the, say, the smart grid technology, just to briefly return to that, I mean, there are peak time loads. There are times when it would be more appropriate to you know, to revert the system to say collecting surplus generation kind of supply. And you know, to kind of bring that surplus into the system for redistribution. I mean, all of that seems to come back to whether or not there is a strategic plan that allows you to, you know, operate, say, off-grid when that is the appropriate response, to connect to the grid if you need additional support, or if you want to dispose of surplus generation.
Yeah, I mean, as Reverend said, there is demand-side management. There's also storage, which I don't know if Patrick might want to talk briefly with his other hat on. But there's the ability to store electricity, which is notoriously difficult to store, and I think there's certainly groups in Northern Ireland looking at how to store electricity more effectively. So it really is, you know, we're definitely moving away from here's your power plant, here's your demand, just match them up, and we're getting into a much more circular system where demand can be reduced when necessary, storage can be increased where necessary. Ultimately, if you're looking at smart meters down the line, and even individual households will say, right, this morning it's cost X amount to run the washing machine, I'll do it later on tonight when it'll be cheaper, and it's a much more circular system, and we're not there yet, but I know there's initiatives ongoing to make that a reality.
Okay, just a final
very briefly, Mitchell.
It's just where we referred to the you know, the upgrading, the retrofitting of the substations. Is there anything to indicate that that is going to have an impact, beneficial impact on the time for, connections and the costs involved?
Early indications that we have from...
Is it sufficient, I suppose, is what I'm asking?
Well, early indications we have from substations that have been complete are that as soon as they're complete, there's such a backlog waiting that within 2 weeks it's back in the red again. Now, okay, you maybe have 6 or 10 small single turbines connected that weren't connected 2 weeks before, but the backlog, the system's up to here.
Okay, thanks
Thank
for
you,
that.
Chair.
Just sort of ways coming in on the back of the length of connections, just could I put to you, we have, maybe I'll be one of your members, I'm not too sure, Simple Power, is that part of your group?
Yeah.
They have a submission sent in to us here today, and I'll read from the extract from it here. In our view, the 90 days allowed for NIE to provide a quotation in the first place is overly long. For example, a normal customer connection is required to be provided with an offer in 30 days. We don't see the reason for a 90-day period for small generators. Indeed, our experience is that NIE do not come to the site to look at the job until 70 to 80 days have elapsed. Is that inefficiency on their part, or it seems that if you give 90 days, they'll take 90 days out of it. That's what I'm reading from this. Whereas if you give somebody 60 days, they'll maybe take 50 out of it. That's what I'm reading from this. So would that be a common experience with yourselves? I know you said, Mr. Adams, and I'm looking to you here because you seem to be the guy. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you worked for NIE at some stage.
He's long here.
They are butcher, gamekeeper, or whatever. So could you give me just some of your experiences on that, please, for the record?
I wouldn't totally disagree with your summarisation of the situation.
Do you agree with it?
Yes.
That's okay, got there.
But I think the topic of concerned with the volume of small generation is unique, and that they have so many applications, and unlike straightforward domestic connections, some of these require detailed studies. But I do believe, having been given 90 days, they look on that as an end date by which they have to have the quotation out, rather than as a maximum date that they can go to if they have to.
But as you know, and the point you're making is, for small generators, you don't need a complex study done into it. You need a study more than a domestic connection. No, I know that.
But again, we talked about earlier, the 2 week period whereby you get a suggestive offer and access to their geographical information systems that allow us to see, as other departments can see, NIE's network, to allow us as developers to see that and to...
Sorry, just Gordon.
To allow us and other developers to see the infrastructure that they have, and perhaps collaboratively provide some joined up thinking to a solution for that connection in that area. All of that would expedite and reduce those timelines.
Okay, right, thank you for that.
So, does that mean that they're operating, say, on a default arrangement, which is they give you 90 days, but in practice it takes them maybe 2 to 3 weeks max to turn it around when they eventually arrive?
I think, Mervyn might correct me here, but I think the licence conditions are that there is a 90-day period, and that applies across the board, whether it's a small connection
but in
or a
practice, when they turn up on site, they can turn it around in 2 or 3.
Well, again, that's internal within NIE. It's like studying for an exam.
It's about time somebody looked at the 90 days requirement if it doesn't take 90 days, is what I'm getting at.
There's an length of time allotted to them to come back to us.
But like with the problem of this exam, it could be costing somebody else money.
Well, without doubt, and delayed investment, and you will have an example of developers that have global interest.
Yes.
And they look at the delays Northern Ireland developers are facing and say, well, we'll allocate that capital funding to a development elsewhere in the world, because we can do it much more quickly and it's a much more streamlined process. And that could even be in the south of Ireland. So we have those hurdles.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Agnew.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for missing your presentation. I did read the brief, so I hope I haven't missed too much. Just to, I suppose, hopefully finish off on the issue of connection. Is there a danger if we follow your approach of asking for upfront costs, that you as a developer might say, well, we've 5 possible sites here, we want a quote for each of them, and in that way you increase the workload on NIE and the clogging of the system? Is that a danger, or would their charges actually deter you from doing something like that?
Well, you could have a situation where a developer has 5 planning applications arriving at the one time. It's highly unlikely, and therefore there is a sort of a stage and gate process by default to which you apply to NIE on a maybe month-by-month basis. But I think at that stage it would be quite a simple matter of NIE coming back to and saying, can we spread these a little bit, or can we adjust the submission date? It would be very easy for a developer to bombard an entity with applications purely to clog up their system, but that's really to nobody's benefit.
Well, I don't even mean deliberately to clog it up, but if, as you say, you're trying to budget, you're trying to assess which site's best, you're looking at wind speeds, but then you're also going to look at cost of connection. So if you're trying to make those decisions, you might say, well, we've identified 5 possible sites with a good wind speed.
Well, I think in my market experience would tell us, that we have to apply on a graduated timeline rather than all at once. Sorry, Maeve, did you want to come in on?
No, it was just to say, I mean, any application, whether for planning or grid connection, takes time and money, and I don't really think that there's too many developers out there who would submit a whole series of spurious applications in the off chance that one might get lucky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, and it is. It's a question I asked to try and understand that sort of side of the process.
Stephen, because of the costs that are coming out associated with small-scale renewables, it's certainly one of the key items that small-scale renewable generators take into context in their feasibility study. From a point of view, ideally, yes, they want the best site with the best wind, but certainly whenever they pick that site, they look around and they say, can I see any electricity infrastructure?
Yeah.
And that is a key thing, and that's why it's very important as part of that feasibility study, before they commit large amounts of money in getting badger studies done or whatever, and planning work that they've done, they get an idea of what that cost is going to be. And that's where 2 weeks would be excellent.
Sure. Just a point to make. I was quite surprised when I got my pack and read that your position is that you don't want to see simultaneous planning and grid connection applications, and just from an industry point of view, I've heard the exact opposite from several renewables developers. So, if you talk about clear direction from government, we need clear direction from the industry, and you did say it was a big item for discussion amongst your members. So
I think it'd be fair to say that the policy that's been in place was agreed in discussion with industry, and by and large it has worked. We can see examples of there was a Renewable UK Wave a Tidal conference in Belfast there 2 months ago, and one of the presentations at that was a presentation from the grid owner in Scotland. And their problem was that there was a significant number of renewable project applications that had a grid connection offer and were struggling to develop the project. There was more complex projects, such as tidal projects, or they didn't have tidal, or they didn't have planning permission. So what they were facing was a significant chunk of megawatts, particularly in the north of Scotland, which couldn't be used and couldn't be reallocated, and there was projects that maybe had moved a bit faster with their planning permission, couldn't get a grid connection. So if you shift it entirely from grid connection first and then planning, there will also be problems. So up until now, and I'm sure that, as you know, there is discussion within the group, but up until now we do feel as though planning permission first has worked. Better provision of information earlier on, absolutely support that, and NIE have made some moves in that direction, and it'd be great to see more.
I think it's significant that the south of Ireland, for their next gate, is moving to a position where they will only accept once they have planning permission.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they've suffered under the previous regime and are looking to what's in place up here as potentially the solution to that.
Okay. Moving on, or moving back to smart grids. What understanding have NIE of smart grids at present?
In terms of technical.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned that there are some pilots taking place in GB, but you know, what level of understanding is there a capacity issue within NIE? Is that part of the issue?
No, our feeling is there's quite a good level of understanding and interaction. NIRIG has been directly responsible and maybe, how would you say it, poking them with a stick a wee bit to move in the right direction. But they are engaging with one of the firms that we would consider to be a UK leader in this, who has a number of up and running schemes. They're interacting back to the industry and telling us where they are with these. We'd still like to see it going quicker, but it's moving, and we have no doubt that there is the technical expertise within NIE to both understand and when they make the decision to implement schemes such as these.
Again, you mentioned the way they would likely do it would be pilot.
Yes.
Pilot it. Are you aware, is there any timeline on that happening?
That is one of the things as an industry we are pushing them for, to give us a time frame so we have a fuller understanding of when the end results might be visible.
Do they even seem minded to go in that direction?
I think they are, but they haven't reached the end of. They're in a consultation phase with this provider. So what they have is paperwork exercises and schemes worked out on paper. The next step, I would assume, is that they take one of those schemes and they implement it and they prove that it can work. We're pushing them to say, right, your schemes show that you can do maybe 2 turbines up close to the substation in every circuit without affecting it. Whereas your worst design saying put the turbine at the end of the line. So why don't we go on ahead and connect all those 2 turbines up close to the substation if they're going to have no effect? Why don't we do that now? So the industry is pushing the boundaries to see if we can speed the thing up.
Briefly, Stephen, just we're close on the time. Just.
Okay. Would it be helpful if they had a dedicated person or team focusing on smart grid? Is that something you've asked for?
Undoubtedly it would. The drawback with that is you need somebody with a high level of technical expertise and knowledge of the system. Now, you're not going to meet one of them walking down the street. He's probably in NIE at the minute. So you're into this thing, if you pick him out and put him in a dedicated team, he creates a hole, maybe in the quotation generation, that, you know, that's...
Sure, I have a few more questions,
well,
but
if there's a few more, we agreed earlier there that what we would do is submit them in writing. But I'm really pressed for time, Steve. Sure. If you have one teeny brief one and a brief response back from.
Okay. Well, it's just
patient,
to get a sense of how much risk NIE would be taking and investing in one of these pilots. When you say you could, this is an alternative to the investment in the grid. What kind of costs are we talking about? So. Presumably you say this is a better alternative because it's more cost effective?
Yeah. The likes of those substations where they got the 2.3 million investment, you were able to enable that substation with an investment of, I'm guessing 6,000 per substation. Whereas without that, what you would have to do was restring the line back to the turbine at a cost of maybe 20,000. So they are cost effective.
Okay. That concludes our session for today. Thanks very much for your invaluable insights there, and that's proven very helpful and useful to us, and obviously it's all been Hansard and recorded here for for our perusal later on whenever we're producing reports. So thank you again. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Again, just if the committee ever wants to visit a wind farm, contact me and we'll get that arranged. It's very useful to go and experience these things.
You mean a non-contentious one?
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, I think at this point in time we're in numbers. If we could suspend for 5 minutes, I know Bill's coming back, and then we'll resume in 5 minutes' time then, okay?
Okay.
Just to take evidence and make decisions. It's a wee bit tricky to do it.
Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.
Public, Right. Next item on the agenda is an oral briefing from Action Renewables on electricity policy review part 3, grid connections. And again, to members of the public particularly, this would cover the Hansard, so electronic devices with the exception of assembly tablets should be switched off. And items in relation to this are included at page 29. Page 30 we have the clerk's briefing, and the briefing paper from Action Renewables at page 32. And today briefing the committee are Michael Doran, Executive Director, and Jonathan Buick, Head of Project. You're both very welcome indeed. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you.
On what's proven very, very interesting topic. So I saw you were here, I think, for the most of the previous session. So you have up to 10 minutes to make an initial presentation and then Q&A session from members. Okay?
Okay.
So please continue. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're probably going to take less than 10 minutes to do the presentation.
Whatever suits.
I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that.
Here.
Thank you. We're going to highlight 3 issues, 2 of which are directly related to your brief. One of them is slightly peripheral, and Jonathan's going to handle that at the end. The first 2 main issues that we want to talk about is the length of time that it takes to make a grid connection, and the second one is to do with cost. What Jonathan will be talking about is a specific issue to do with small-scale renewables, and it's not specifically part of the brief that you had originally drafted, but I think it's related, and we'll explain that when we get that far. First of all, you've already got a submission. I'm going to summarise that very quickly. 2 issues to do with grid connection. One of them you've already discussed during the NIRIG discussion earlier on, which is the 90 days that it takes, and it always takes NIE 90 days to come out and give you a quote. The second one, which is more of an issue, is once you've received the quotation, the amount of time that it takes before they actually make the connection. That now is typically of the order of 2 years within Northern Ireland. And that's becoming a major issue. The second issue, which is to do with cost, within, there's a separate issue as well within GB. When you get your grid offer, they also give you a date for grid connection. That doesn't happen within Northern Ireland. So when they give you the grid offer and you pay the deposit, you have no indication when the grid connection will actually be made. Getting on to the second issue, which is to do with cost. I should have started by saying that we're typically working in the 50 to 500 kilowatt range. So we don't tend to be in the larger scale market, which NIRIG are working in. We also don't tend to do a lot of work at small domestic scale. So what I'm talking about, these are issues particularly within the 50 to 500 kilowatt scale. Typically in Northern Ireland, the cost of grid connection is now somewhere between 20 and 50% of the total capital cost of the project. In England, that is 5%. So it is costing considerably more in Northern Ireland to get a grid connection. We did a survey of the last 15 projects in which we were involved in Northern Ireland. The average cost was £174,000, and that was typically for a 250 kilowatt wind turbine. So those were pushing, on average, about 40% of the total capex. We had one of that 15, and the grid quote was £309,000. The turbine was costing £150,000, so it was costing twice as much as the turbine. So I'll ask Jonathan to highlight the third issue.
Well, yes, the third issue is with another sector which we work with, which is the small-scale PV, the micro-scale photovoltaic or solar panels that you'll have seen popping up on roofs across Northern Ireland. We've become aware within the last 6 months or so that the electricity which those panels generate and export to the grid is not assigned to electricity suppliers. In other words, it's just absorbed into the NIE system and effectively reduces the losses attributed to the NIE grid in the transmission of electricity. Now, at the moment there is one electricity supplier that is willing, and we're not entirely sure the mechanisms, but is willing to purchase that electricity even though the electricity isn't assigned to it, and that's Power NI. We feel that competition is something that's lacking in that area in terms of the export of domestic renewable electricity onto the grid. Is something that happens, of course, in GB, where the export is deemed to be deemed, and any electricity supplier can purchase that electricity and the electricity being assigned to them. Or another alternative would be to install half-hourly metering, and at the moment we're understanding that NIE to date is not allowing installers to install their own half-hourly meters. The cost of NIE installing half-hourly meters being prohibitive for that scale of development. So that's another issue that we've come across.
Okay, that's you finished for your presentation. And you raised a number of very interesting issues there. In terms of yourself, Mr. Doran, you said that NIE always take 90 days to come out and do the initial thing. That's in all cases, and sort of lends me to believe from what we were teasing out earlier, they're taking 90 days or up to 90 days simply because they can. And would your advice or suggestion be, just like Simple Power, that if you like, initial period of time should be reduced? In other words, as part of the licence or the criteria, that should be reduced, say, to 50 or 60 days or 40 days?
I think it should be reduced. Approximately a year ago, I chaired a meeting in Antrim, at which there were about 150 farmers present who had made grid applications. And there was a straw poll, and of the 150 in the room, every single one of them had got a grid quote between 88 and 90 days. So it's not abnormal. It's the norm.
But it's abnormally the norm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. Could you give me I don't know whether you have any experience of other places. I don't know in the UK if in fact there are is a comparable sort of date or time frame that within which the
within GB it's normally weeks.
Normally weeks.
Yep.
By the power companies in Britain.
Yep.
Right.
It's normally 3 to 4 weeks in our experience.
Normally 3 to 4 weeks. There you are. And the connection then, I'm coming on to the connection bit here, because you said that in your experience the connection typically was taken up to 2 years.
Yep.
Could you give me?
You can count.
And you mentioned something about the UK grid, the offer on the date of connection. Could you give me some sort of an indication just as to what comparable grid offer and date of connection is from that's done to then the actual length of time, the comparative length of time that's been taken compared to here just?
It's normally 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months. And it's taken 2 years here.
It can take up to 2 years. Now, there are issues here, particularly associated with easements, where you might imagine that it's fairly straightforward and then it gets into complex legal issues. But all I would do is highlight that there is a considerable discrepancy in the amount of time that it takes to make a grid connection here compared to what it takes in GB.
Right.
Now, having said that, I think a large part of the issue, it's not with NIE being uncooperative. I'm not sure that they have the resources to do it any faster.
Which is
I have to tell you a little story about. I first became involved in this about 15 years ago. When I first started dealing with NIE, the first meeting I went to, they were talking about PLGs. And I didn't know what a PLG was. And I said, sorry guys, what's a PLG? And he said, it's a piddly little generator. So that's where you've got a small electricity generator trying to get into the system. That attitude doesn't exist in NIE anymore. They're receptive, they're trying to move forwards, but I think that they're constrained by resources.
right. which brings us probably back to the original question that we were asking earlier on about the input from other companies to do some of this work, and if in fact the licence should be changed to allow for that to happen.
We believe that it should. We think that there should be competition in the market.
Right, yes, that makes sense. Now, mentioned there in your submission, the last 15 projects that you had, it was averaging out 174,000. I think
Yep.
that's what it was for a 250 kilowatt turbine.
Yep.
Now, and obviously it's difficult to average out where there are maybe longer distances to connect into the grid and the likes of that. But again, likewise, have you done any sort of a comparative study with parts of Britain where similar types of projects are? Can you give some sort of an indication there as to what those costs might be?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Well, we can give some examples, because in some of those instances, we have gone to Electricity in Scotland,
yes,
and asked Electricity the cost for constructing a comparative amount of works, to comply with NIE's conditions, and the cost has typically been about a third of.
Really? Right. Would there be any chance that you must have, I'm sure it's not commercially sensitive, that sort of stuff, but
yes.
if you have that sort of comparative study of that, if you could
Yep, we
provide
can get
that to
that
us,
for you,
please,
yes.
that would be very useful indeed.
Yep, we can,
Thank
yes.
you. Thanks very much indeed. Then I have Mr. Dunn, Gordon.
Very much, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming along this morning. You've had a long sit there. You're aware of the number of the issues that we've covered. Quickly, then we'll just cover on the planning permission. What's your attitude in relation to the planning permission issue? Should it run in parallel in relation to applications? Would that be?
For the scale that we're talking at, we think it should run in parallel. Again, I heard NIRIG talking earlier on today, and I can understand why at the larger scale they may be slightly reluctant to go down that route. But for the scale that we're working at, we think it should run in parallel, yes.
Is there any evidence that it doesn't? Is there any evidence that NIE will get involved, say, giving technical advice without planning permission? Do they do that?
NIE will, for a cost, undertake what they call a feasibility study. So they will give you an indication of how much it may cost to connect to the grid without having planning permission. However, as many of our clients would often say, it's not worth the paper it's written on because it doesn't reserve that capacity in the grid. In fact, if your neighbour or someone else down the road were to come with planning permission in place the next day and submit an application then and reserve that capacity by paying a deposit, then of course your quote is meaningless.
And I have to say, referring back to the comment that I made earlier on about them possibly not having adequate resources, I can understand why they don't want to have to give out any more quotations than are absolutely necessary. So it is easier for them to only give a quotation where there is already planning approval, because it means that they're likely to have to process less quotations.
Yeah, so is there a risk then that people will fire in applications in an unmanaged way if you go down this route?
It's possible, because you could put an application in to block the guy next door. So if there's limited capability to get onto the grid, you could get, if you get in first, because they appear to treat them in the order in which you make the application. If you think the guy next door is going to put up a wind turbine, you don't want it to go up, and you make an application to put one up so that he can't get in. That's possible. I don't think it's likely to be a significant issue, but it's possible, yes.
What's the average time now for one of your customers to get planning permission?
To get planning permission? Well, on a good application, it all depends on the quality of the submission. And if a good quality submission also may involve planning consultants helping you draft that submission, and there is significant cost to that. So, coming back to Michael's point as well, if planning permission has a cost to, which may be in the order of about £10,000 or £15,000 for a wind turbine that's in the order of perhaps a few £100,000 development, that's a significant cost. The £6,000 cost or thereabouts for grid connection is also a significant cost. These are not things that are undertaken lightly. So there is a bit of a, putting the cart before the horse as well, as one of the other guys said. We think the two should run in parallel for this, particularly for this scale of development.
And you're talking here
timescales for planning, we would see around, for a good application it can be as quickly as 6 months. For an application where there are
It's at least
other
6 months.
surveys required, batch surveys, and surveys that the client hasn't done beforehand and submitted with.
And that timescale has come down. If you'd asked me the same question 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I would have said it was between 12 and 18 months. The DOE have become much more efficient in processing applications and are doing a very good job.
We can put that on the record.
It is.
The other thing, I think, to be fair, the workload obviously has dropped considerably as well, but it is starting to pick up again.
Yep.
It is, which is good, and we all want to see it. I've been made aware of another issue, and that is in relation from installers and businesses that there is a real problem, especially in the west of the province, being able to make a connection. And basically because the grid is unsuitable to take it, and it's very difficult to connect 50 kilowatt systems into the grid. Are you aware of any solutions or any way of that may be around to try and resolve that issue?
Yeah, there's a specific issue to do typically with 50 kilowatt PV systems.
Yeah, PV systems.
Just to remind you, that you get different levels of ROC support at different scales of generation. So if you have less than 50 kilowatts of PV, of photovoltaic panels, you get 4 ROCs. If you've got if it's got more than 50 kilowatts, you only get 2 ROCs. So a lot of factory roofs will tend typically to go up to 49 kilowatts. When they go to export the electricity back onto the grid, they come under conditions which are called G83. G83 is the code which allows you to connect, and the way in which NIE interpret G83 in Northern Ireland is different to the way that it's interpreted in England. So in Northern Ireland they interpret what is the capacity of the system to produce electricity, and if it's greater than 3.7 kilowatts, so the capacity is greater, then they make you go to a higher level code. In what you can do is put a limiter on, which is called a reverse power relay, which means even though you've got the capacity to produce 49 kilowatts, you can't export more than 3.7 kilowatts. That protects the grid, but NIE won't allow that in Northern Ireland. They say you've got the capacity, even if you put the limiter in, we won't accept that. They then ask you to go to a higher level code. There's now a new code in GB called G83-2, but they seem to be cherry-picking the way in which that's being implemented in Northern Ireland. So there is an issue for PV installers, typically installing 49 kilowatt systems, are being asked to do something which they could address. We talked earlier on about smart metering. Basically, these reverse power relays are a form of smart metering which won't allow too much electricity to go back onto the grid at the one time. But NIE are not accommodating that within their system.
Is that a major disadvantage to PV installers?
Yeah, typically at the 50 kilowatt range, yes.
What do you think we should, as a committee, could do about that?
I understand NIE will be doing a presentation at some stage. I would ask them, because that's something they could address. All they have to do is to fall in line with what's happening with the rest of GB. I don't see it as an insurmountable technical issue.
And are you satisfied that the equipment involved meets regulations, current regulations in relation to the standards?
Yeah, we've done research into that and we're quite satisfied that it's adequate. They take a different point of view. They assess, they interpret the regulations as what is the potential total capacity of your system, not what you're actually trying to put onto the system.
Right. And this is a major drawback?
It is for PV installers in the 50 kilowatt range, yes.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks very much. Thank you.
Just following through on that, what is the oversight body to ensure consistency of standards applied? In other words, if they're behaving differently to what is happening in GB or in fact any place else, we'll take it even further to the EU. What is the oversight body? Is that the regulator? Does the regulator have an input to that? Or?
Yeah, it should. I'm not completely sure. Right. I think it's the regulator. I'm not completely sure.
You'd have to, maybe if you could, well, we can find out anyway, but I know it's a very technical issue that you guys are the experts in, so if you could find out for us and just let us know, and it'll be an issue clearly we can put to NIE, but we can also put to the regulator too. And Jim's just reminded me the regulator's in next week, so if that'd be appropriate if you could get that over to us before next week. Thank you.
Get that information into us.
That'd be great. Aye. Very helpful.
Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Flanagan, Phil.
Thanks, Patsy and gentlemen. Thanks for the presentation. You said that connection costs count for between a fifth and a half of total capital costs, and you quoted the average of 5% in Britain. Have you a comparable cost in the rest of Ireland?
It's a similar cost in the rest of Ireland. It's around about 5% is the costs that we've seen in the research that we've carried out. The particular example that we've looked at ourselves, we've seen that in one instance the quoted cost would have been a third to carry out the same amount of work in GB as it is in Northern Ireland from another contract.
And have you any idea why that is?
Well, we do see that the costs for the equipment that NIE has do seem to be high. Other contractors, the statement of charges do seem to be high for the equipment that they're quoting.
And is there any of the particular items within the statement of charges that are high, or is it just a general thing that they appear to be overinflated?
Well, from our own discussions with our clients, it just seems to be an inflation across the board.
And
a span of line, for example, has a certain cost. A transformer of a certain size has a particular cost, and what we're being told is that those items can be sourced cheaper.
Okay, and speculating a bit, and you don't have to get into this game if you don't want to, but could any of that be attributed to the claim that ESB overpaid when they bought NIE, and this is how they're trying to get their money back?
Don't know.
Talking into speculation here?
No. I just plain don't know.
No.
Just facts.
What impact does disproportionately high grid connection have on renewable energy development?
It's discouraging it. It's not. If there was more, we believe if there was more competition in the market, there would be more renewable electricity going in. Now you've still got the issue of grid capacity, which is not NIE's fault. They're just trying to deal with the system. And again, presenter earlier on, Maeve Cormican, was talking about needing a strategic approach to improve the grid, and the fact that the grid is now coping with issues for which it was not designed. Whatever happens, money has to be spent on the grid. The issue is, where does the money come from? And I don't think that's been clearly identified. My opinion is that the Competition Commission is also restricting NIE, who are trying to upgrade the grid. So, for instance, on the last determination, they cut their prices back, and a large part of that price increase was associated with the grid improvement, which is required. If there isn't an improvement in the grid, then we're going to restrict the amount of renewables that will go ahead in Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Is there a problem with NIE profiteering here?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. You don't think they're making too much profit based on the...
I don't believe so. I think it's an issue of resources, and also of somebody determining at a strategic level who's going to pay for the upgrade of the grid.
And you don't... Do you think that NIE are playing a game to overstate the extent of the problem to try and attract additional investment from the regulator?
I don't believe so, no. I think they're trying to address the issue, but the Competition Commission is actually holding them back, because they're only acting on how do we keep the bills down for customers. And I think it's a bigger picture than that, and it's something we're all aware of, which is security of supply. And I think you need to balance that with the environmental considerations and with the cost. In my opinion, it's not just a cost issue.
So you disagree with the Competition Commission's findings then?
Yeah. And
do you completely support NIE's submission?
Not completely. It's a very complicated. Again, I didn't read the entire 700-page. But I think that they're acting, and the regulator has also acted in a similar vein in the last few years, I think my opinion is that it's an overemphasis on cost control, not looking at the carbon management, the carbon implications, and not looking at the environmental implications and security supply issues. If we don't have an upgraded grid, and on a slightly separate issue, if we don't have an improvement in the interconnector to the south of Ireland, it's going to limit the amount of renewables that will be delivered in Northern Ireland, and we won't hit the 40% target.
But renewable connections are to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Yep.
So what you're saying there really doesn't make sense.
Well, it does, because if it's on a case-by-case basis and you don't have a strategic overview to improve the grid to the west, then every time an individual application goes in, it's going to go to for the scale we're talking at, it'll go to 200,000 to 300,000 to 500,000 to 1 million just to connect one turbine, which is not cost effective, so it'll stop that turbine. It needs an overall view of how do you address the overall grid issue and where does the money come from to address that. And I don't see that being a major political debate at the moment. It doesn't seem to be in the domain about who's going to pay for it, because I don't think a decision has been made that we actually need a grid improvement, which I think we do need.
But I don't think there's any dispute that the grid needs improved, but some of us are of the opinion that it's a contrived argument from NIE and others to attract additional investment in to improve the profit that they make as an organisation. That's what my concern would be.
Yeah, that's valid. That's not my opinion.
Okay. And in terms of the absence of a strategic plan, or I forget the word used, but a strategic approach, do you support the proposal for clustering?
Yes, I think that makes sense.
Okay, and would that have a significant impact on the need for upgrading the grid and grid strengthening if there were to be a smaller number of clusters as opposed to wind turbines?
No, the clustering is of more benefit to the larger wind farm applications. Most of the sector that we deal with is what we'd probably call medium. It's not the small scale, it's not the large scale, so it's not really going to assist us, because the clusters are not likely to be where the individuals are trying to put up the wind turbines.
Okay. And do you think there's an adequate level of transparency within NIE's decision-making process and on its actual decisions?
No, I don't believe there is.
And what improvements would you like to see to increase transparency there?
Well, the first one, the technical issue, is in Jonathan.
Well, a full breakdown of costs would help to understand how these quotes have been arrived at.
So, just for the record,
yes,
whenever a person gets a quote, it doesn't give a specific breakdown, X, Y, Z. Right, okay.
No, in many instances, in fact, what we're finding is that after the 90 days, the client may be contacted by NIE and simply told that the cost is likely to exceed £200,000, and at that point the client is given a choice, the choice of, do you wish to go ahead with the full quotation, and that will involve more work and extra time, or do you want to go back to the fallback position of having simply a feasibility study, which we spoke about earlier, which is simply, we'll give you a price on paper, but we're not going to hold the grid for you. Now, obviously, at that point, the client's already got his plan of operation. He's already in this process. So to do that would be to effectively kill the project. So the majority do, at that stage, go on and say, no, just go ahead with the full study, and then later they come back with a £300,000 cost. So it's... does that answer your question, sorry?
Your question?
On the back of this, what?
And finally, what's the highest quotation you've seen for connection of a single wind turbine to the grid?
It's in excess of £800,000.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to...
Sorry, let me take a... When you say in excess of £800,000, do you mean like 820 or do you mean like 2 million? Same with the NIE.
It's 800 and something. I don't remember the exact figure. It's 800 and something.
Right. And
but I think they're maybe even higher than that.
Right. Coming back to the point we were talking about strategic overview, and who do you think currently is responsible for that strategic overview, or who should be?
I think DETI should be. I think Strategic Energy Framework was a great move in the right direction. I think it set clear targets and objectives for Northern Ireland, but there hasn't been much movement on identifying what's going to happen with the grid and who's responsible for it since.
That's what I was going to. That was my next question. Who do you feel should be responsible for investment in the grid then?
That's a difficult question to answer because we don't have. We're not part of the decision-making process, right. And I think it's a decision that the politicians have to make within Northern Ireland. We're not political. I'm not being cagey here. I think it's actually a decision that the politicians in Northern Ireland have to decide. I think it's a decision that has to be made, and avoiding it isn't solving the problem.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anderson, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. I think most of the questions I wanted have been touched on. There's a question on costing, and it's relating to a developer if they go in and connect, they could be charged a very high cost. But if other ones they come in and connect, do they get a less cost?
No, in fact,
or is there the first connector compensated back because of that? I do know even if upgrades of electricity transformers and all take place at present time in housing developments, if someone goes in at the cost within a time span, that first developer can be compensated back for the amount of money that was outlaid at the start. Does that something would happen here?
No, typically what happens is that the first connection would be the least costly.
Oh.
The second connection would cost more.
Why is that?
Because it requires more work. In fact, further back along the line to upgrade the cables back towards the substation.
Is that always the case?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yeah.
Because the first, if you imagine, whenever the first wind turbine, we'll take an example of 200 kilowatt wind turbine, whenever the first wind turbine connects into the line, there may be a capacity of about 400 kilowatts available. So that first wind turbine can connect in, and all that's required is maybe 3 spans of overhead lines and the transformer to connect him in. The next turbine might connect a little bit further down the line, but that capacity has been taken up. There maybe isn't the spare capacity now in the line, so he has to pay for the upgrade of that line back to perhaps a position where it can take that electricity. So he's paying for maybe 3 kilometres of upgrades.
So whatever way it's done in fairness to each of them.
At the point whenever they make their application.
It is fairly done, there's no discrepancy.
No,
there.
we believe that's fairly done.
That's the point I was at. Getting back to investments, when I asked earlier on to NIRIG, what planned investments do you think would need to be done to resolve the current issues with the grid? And we have the interconnectors, the north-south and the Moyle and such like. How do you see that going forward?
Okay, Moyle is one issue.
Yes.
I think it's running at about 45% capacity. That needs to be upgraded. I think it's unfortunate that the interconnector to the south of Ireland has been pushed off to a planning inquiry. My opinion is that a political decision should have been made to go ahead with that. I've got no control over that. Because of the nature of wind and intermittency, the more wind that you have on the system, the more interconnectors you need to keep the system robust. So I think it's absolutely critical that that interconnector goes ahead, and then we need a strategic assessment of what needs to be done to the grid in the short term and who's going to pay for it. There was a discussion earlier on, and I'm sure you don't want to go over it again, with the previous submission about the opportunities for smart metering. NIE are already involved in one project in Coleraine. There's another project coming online in Lecale down near Downpatrick, which is looking at specific like pilot projects. Right at the moment, smart metering is not going to solve the problem. Upgrading the grid needs to go ahead as soon as possible. If not within a year or two, it's going to restrict our ability to put further renewables on. But it needs a strategic overview.
Yeah, and to reach the targets by 2020.
Yep.
It has a massive factor that you're telling us.
Yep. It's going to become increasingly more difficult as time goes on if there isn't significant investment.
Okay. was touched on earlier on as well, and this is my last question, Chair, in relation to the cost and how it inhibits renewable energy development. How great do you think that high cost is inhibiting? What level do you think it inhibits? Is it greatly? Is it massive? Huge is the word that I used earlier on. So we'll use the word huge today again in this.
Well, when the cost of grid connection exceeds 50% of the total capital costs, it is a showstopper. Those projects don't go ahead, and we know that from some of our clients who have just stopped. They've given up now because of the quotations for grid connection. And NIE recognises that too, of course, when they contact the client and say it's likely to be excessive. Do you want us to go ahead? But of course, at that point, the client has committed himself.
It's a difficult question to answer because typically we're talking about 250 kilowatt wind turbines. If you compare that against a 2.5 megawatt single turbine in a wind farm, and there could be 10 of those, so you could have a 25 megawatt wind farm versus a 250 kilowatt. You need 100 of the 250s to make up the 25 megawatt. At the scale that we're talking about, it's probably stopping 30, 40, 50% the cost of the grid. Yes, but that's a relatively small part of the overall electricity generation. The wind farms are generating more. But at the scale we're talking about, it's a significant deterrent. But one of the things I would point out is that the smaller wind farms, sorry, not the smaller wind farms, the smaller turbines, typically at 250 kilowatt, are owned by people in the locality, or they could be owned by the community. They're not owned by companies that may or may not be resident in Northern Ireland. All of that money resides within Northern Ireland. So while it may be relatively insignificant in terms of actual numbers of kilowatts, I think it has a more significant contribution to the local economy.
Yes, we did have a sort of quick calculation to work out the value of the small-scale wind sector, as it's known, and for those turbines that are sitting, not constructed at the moment, but sitting with planning permission, the income to Northern Ireland in the annually, if those 700 wind turbines were to be constructed and connected, is in the order of £100 million per year into the Northern Ireland
for 20 years. And I would imagine most of that money will continue to circulate. If it's a farmer, he puts in more potatoes, or he buys another tractor, or he builds another outhouse, or whatever, the money stays within the economy.
It's good to get that information, I'll say, and in relation to more out into the community and those types of wind turbines. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sid. There was one point, and I think it was yourself, Mr. Buick, referred to it earlier, and I didn't pursue it at the time because it passed my agenda here, but the you had referred to the solar PV, not, the stuff that's coming from solar photovoltaic, not being recorded by NIE.
That's right.
If it's not recorded, then how did they determine what percentage is coming from that renewable sector, from those PV panels? And therefore, how can the percentages be accurate if it isn't being recorded? Maybe I'm just missing something there, but...
Well, it's not being recorded, and as such, there will be just simply an estimate. So it's not there's no precise figure as to how much electricity has been exported from small-scale PV in Northern Ireland. We don't know, because we don't have the metering in place to be able to do that.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you for that.
So how do we know how much incentivisation has been paid if you don't know how much has been exported?
The incentivisation is based on what's being generated and not what's being exported. We work with a lot of those customers with the small scale, the domestic PV sector, which is typically your maybe 3, 4 or 5 kilowatts of PV panels on a roof. Yes. We have to phone the homeowner annually and ask him how much he has generated in the last year. It's the only way to get that information.
I've seen some of them, they use their tablets and stuff like that.
You can use tablets. There are some online programs that come along with some of the panels, but we phone the customer, and if we don't get that information, then we estimate it.
And how does the customer record it, other than those who are very computer savvy and stuff?
He reads his meter.
All right.
Yeah, there are 2 meters involved in nearly all renewable generation installations. One being a generation meter, which is recording the generation, and then another at the point of connection to the grid, which is NIE's meter. And they're the only ones that can install that meter, and that's an import-export meter. So it's recording the flow of electricity in both directions, one into the property and one out.
But they don't read it, is that what you're saying?
They don't read the export. They will read the import, but not the export. And this is you will all know this from your own meters in your own homes, of course, that it's the meter reader that comes out to read it, and if you're not in, then you're asked to either fill it in yourself or it's estimated.
There are also different kinds of meters, because the meter which is required to record the electricity being exported for it to be identified has to be a half-hour meter, which is not normal. The normal meter that's in your house is not a half-hour meter. And the additional cost of getting a half-hour meter is typically in Northern Ireland about £450. Elsewhere, that's typically about £150, and only one company can install that meter.
Not NIE by any chance, no?
Funny enough, yes.
And so they're charging, that's for the meter installation and all,
yes.
It's 450 quid, and elsewhere meter installation and all is 150 quid.
Yes.
Seem to get a ball. There we go. Oh well. Thanks for that. Mr. Agnew, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Trying to get to grips with this issue with the small-scale PV and the export issue. The issue of competition in this case and contestability earlier has come up across, it seems to be across the whole energy sector, so to speak. In terms of this particular issue of the exporting of PV and the purchasing of the rocks, then, what's the barrier to entry from someone else in terms of purchasing the rocks from small-scale PV?
The issue is not the purchasing of the rocks. Just to give you an example, if you have a PV system on your roof and you generate electricity, you, at the end of the year, work out how much of that was generated from your PV system. You can then claim 4 rocks on it, and you'll be paid for that. But the electricity which is exported from your house back onto the grid, even though you may know over the year that it's a certain number of kilowatts, you will not be paid for the electricity that you sell back onto the grid.
Sorry, it's the export electricity, sorry, that's what, rather than the rocks, yes.
But not Power NI will pay you for that electricity, but no other supplier can do so because there isn't the mechanism for it. That's the issue.
The issue is the mechanism?
The issue is part of the single electricity market. And what we're being told by NIE is that in order for electricity to be dealt with in the single electricity market, it has to be recorded on half-hourly meters. And the homeowners don't have half-hourly meters. Whenever NIE, whenever the installer installs the system, the house doesn't have a half-hourly meter, and NIE in fact won't install.
When Power NI purchased it, though, obviously the half-hourly meter still doesn't exist for them. So
that's correct.
That's right.
Okay, so how are they able to purchase?
We don't know. And we've addressed this issue with the regulator, and to date have been unable to get an answer.
Okay. As you'll know, I've been asking questions around this issue, and I met with Power NI subsequently. They would say it's very much a requirement that they purchase it, rather than, from what I picked up, there isn't a licensing issue. What you're telling me, it's almost a knowledge issue, a technological issue, perhaps?
No, it's not. If your house has a PV panel on the roof and you're not contracting with Power NI, you contract with one of the other suppliers. Those suppliers cannot pay you for the electricity because there's no mechanism for them to do that.
Okay.
So you're encouraged to go to Power NI.
Who needs to set up the when you say a mechanism, a kind of licensing mechanism, or
Yes.
Yes, okay, it's a licensing issue.
But we don't
Would be the
see
utility
Power
regulator.
NI are licensed to do it either. We don't understand why they're paying you for that electricity, because they can't claim it back either.
Yeah, yeah, and they would certainly say that they're required to do it, so they see it as a burden more than a benefit.
I can understand that, yes.
Yeah.
I can understand that. One possible solution may be to have a virtual half-hourly recording all of the domestic export in Northern Ireland and assigning that into the grid, and then in that way then it can be dealt with. But that's
Proportionately by the number of exporters.
absolutely. So in other words, it could be dealt with in a similar sort of way to GB, where it's simply deemed that in GB half of the generation of a small-scale PV system is deemed to have been exported, and therefore it can be assigned to electricity suppliers.
Okay.
Whether or not that happens is irrelevant, but across the board, that's what they use.
Okay. The issue of cost then of grid connection obviously come up in both presentations. John, I think I'm right in saying that's where you said in Scotland it's a third or to do the same work. Now you've also said you don't think NIE are profiteering. Why then is it costing 3 times more in Northern Ireland, or in some cases anyway?
Because there's no competition.
Then this is where I'm trying to confuse the lack of competition. If you're saying there's a monopoly, which we know there is, it's a regulated monopoly, but it's a monopoly all the same. Why are monopolies bad? Because either they allow you to profiteer or you become inefficient. So is it the inefficiency then?
I think it's inefficiencies.
Okay.
I don't think they're profiteering, but that's just an opinion. I don't have insight into what their costs, their actual costs are, what their cost base is. I don't know. All we're highlighting is it's costing more money here to get a grid connection, considerably more than somewhere else in GB.
And the barrier then in this case to competition, is that a legislative barrier?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody else at the moment is allowed to make a grid connection within Northern Ireland.
Okay, yeah. But I just want that confirmed if that was the case. Seems to be an issue with NIE. You might share this and you might not. Around innovation. We've talked about smart grids, and they seem, from our last presentation, again, you can tell me if it's your experience, they seem to be being dragged towards it rather than willingly, kind of embracing this new technology. You mentioned the issue, and I always forget the terminology, but where you need a constraint on PV to stop exporting it to the grid so that you don't incur the extra charges from NIE. They've resisted that technology, again, even though it's been used in GB. Would you say, is that how you would see it, that they're a fear of innovation? They're
Yes,
risk
no.
averse, I think was used.
They're risk averse. They come from a background of engineering, and their prime objective is to protect the grid. So the last thing they want is a blackout where the grid goes down. And when you've got lots of little generators creating voltage variations, it has the potential to create issues. But for instance, I don't think they're averse to innovation, because they're part of the project that's going, the smart metering that's going in Coleraine. They're part of that project. We have nothing to do with it, but I understand that they're a very active part of the project and want to see that successful. I think they've been quite cooperative with the project that's going ahead down in Lecale as well. So they're not trying to block it, but what they are concerned about is protecting the robustness of the grid. I can understand it. I don't understand what the issue is around the G83.1 and the G83.2. That I don't understand, and I think that they could address that.
What's the term, the technology that
A reverse power relay.
that's the one. Okay.
It's basically a little box that stops too much electricity going back at the one
I
time.
get the principle, I can just never remember what you call them.
We also have conflicting stories about the use of such technology at a somewhat larger scale. For example, I think it was touched on before, perhaps maybe a significant user of electricity wanting to install a wind turbine to offset his own load, but being refused because if the factory load wasn't there isn't significant capacity in the grid or sufficient capacity in the grid to be able to take the electricity from that turbine if it was blowing a gale, for example. We've had conflicting stories about whether NIE, I think they may be changing their position on that, whether that's allowed or not allowed, or what the story is. So that may be something to clarify.
On that particular issue there, and I'm glad you did raise it, what's to prevent an individual developer, it could be a farmer or a factory owner, whatever it may be, generating their own electricity for their own use without connection to the grid, and simultaneously having, if in case they run out of power or in case they run low on power, still having a connection to the grid purely for usage rather than export?
Yes, that's what we're referring to, yes.
You can do that.
That's what I'm... So there's nothing at all to stop them doing that other than...
And there are people doing that.
Yeah. Is this like down at Thompson, the mill place there?
Yeah.
They're doing that. That's what they're doing, is it? Yes. Okay.
But where there is an issue that we've been told is that if the farmer wants to install higher capacity than he has a sufficient connection for.
Yes.
For example, if he can only at any one time bring in 50 kilowatts of power, and that's all the capacity that's in that grid, but he wants to install a 250 kilowatt turbine, understanding that the output from the turbine goes up and down with the wind, and it may average about 50 kilowatts, matching his own use. That's what we're being told is being blocked by NIE. But there are instances that we're aware of that it has happened.
So it's piecemeal?
It seems to be piecemeal, a bit of a piecemeal approach to that kind of scenario.
Well, I suppose we'll have to ask him this, but why would they block some and allow others then?
We're not entirely sure.
Oh no? Right. Okay, that'll be a question for us to put to them, I suppose, at some stage whenever we see them. Well, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. That has proven very, very useful and informative to us here today. Thank you for your input. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Just clarity on one thing.
Just,
you stated, Stephen, that there was a legislative problem that means NIE are going to be able to do grid connections. Where is that stated in legislation? Do you know?
It's within their licence. They're the only company allowed within Northern Ireland by the regulator to make grid connections.
And clearly states that in their licence?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's a few other questions we have, so if it's okay with you, we'll submit those to you in written form. And practice, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much for your time. Okay. All right. Now we move to agenda item number 6, and these are matters which are included at page 36. We'll press through these as quickly as we can.
Right. Chair, before we move on, there might be a few follow-up issues.
Yes.
Well, maybe we want to take all the submissions and
yes. And we'll do as before, just do a washover of them all and then deliberate on them as a committee in a bit more detail.
Chair, can I just say something that for the last 2 items, there are the list of questions, but if members, which can be forwarded obviously to them, but if members have any additional questions, if they can come back to me by say tomorrow with any additional questions they want to ask of either of the witnesses, they can be included before we send it off.
Okay. And just in regard to that matter, if can I ask for permission from members, if they're content that written briefings regarding the Electricity Policy Review Part 3 are published on the Assembly website once the committee has received the consent of the author. Agreed?
Yeah.
Diane.
Okay, thanks for that.
Ireland's going to be free tomorrow, Cathy, that's what we just agreed on. We're passing a motion that Ireland's going to be free tomorrow.
Oh, definitely.
From what?
From shows what happens when you're not listening, Gordon. You should have listened.
Can we move on then to page 37? Retail incubation is DETI's response to the committee's queries on developing a coordinated approach to a programme for retail incubation. Unless members have any comments, are they content to note?
Good man.
Possibly, if we could just suggest to the department that they, I know there's a suggested down at the bottom here, it's referring to providing difficult to provide definitive view on how this type of incubation would differ from existing provision. So maybe we could nudge them in the direction of some sort of collaborative working approach between NERTA, the FSB and the department. Okay, great. Rossa Task Force Desk Officer Report, page 48, correspondence from OFM, DFM regarding the points that we raised about the...
FSB,
to suggest a collaborative approach between NERTA, FSB, the Federation of Small Business and the department in regard to it. Okay, so at page 48 we have the following a little bit of digging from ourselves. We asked just what was the end product, and unfortunately it doesn't seem to have been an awful lot in regard to the issues that were raised in the desk officer's report. So anyway, clearly the flow of information that we're getting is poor. Well, it doesn't really give us any product, and that was what we were looking for. So we'll content to note this until we get other further details by our meeting in mid-June then. Okay, at page 50 is a letter from Detty advising that the evaluation of G8 Summit won't be available until June, when it will be forwarded to the committee. Okay, noted. Page 51 is in regard to the response from the department outlining what Tourism Ireland is doing to promote Giro d'Italia and the overall cost to the taxpayer for hosting the Giro. The committee is still waiting for a response to ascertain what the Northern Ireland Tourist Board is doing. So, content to note.
Okay, can I follow up there, Patsy? We're told that last year's Giro was broadcast and had a global audience of about 775 million people. Can we get a breakdown of where those 775 million people were?
Well, some guy's getting paid $3 million here to broadcast to them and make sure it's broadcast to them. So I'm sure you can set it.
But there's a big difference between broadcasting and watching it.
Yeah, okay.
We really expect to think that 10% of the people in the world watch this.
I seriously don't know. There's some people might be watching the news and see it at the end of the news or something.
There's a big difference between the figure we were told at the start, which was a potential audience of 775 million, but it now seems to have been adopted as an audience of 775 million. So I want clarity. I wonder why.
Right, can we get some details, projected details of actual audience? Or actual, maybe,
viewing figures?
Now, page 54 is in relation to the investment strategy portal delivery portal, project delivery portal. So this is from Detty. I know there have been some issues raised around this. So if we're content to forward this response to the Committee for Finance and Personnel for information. Next item, page 55, Detty's response regarding the interim targets in the ERDF programme. Unless anyone has any comments or agreed to note.
Great.
COSMA at page 56 of the Department's response to the Committee's request for names of banks that ex-ante consultants had approached. Unless we have members of any comments on this, content to note.
Great.
Next item, Strasbourg Declaration on Proposed Social Value Framework. Just to inform members that these are restricted papers and they're included at page 57 from Bryson House on the Strasbourg Declaration, a proposed social value framework for the third sector. Now, if members have any comments, we could note this, but are we in a position with the, I presume the department should have access to this, but I don't know, with the permission, given it's a restricted document to us, with the permission of Bryson House, could we ask the department for a few views on this? Okay, great. DFP Energy Efficiency Action Plan. The Department, page 102, the Department of Finance and Personnel has a state energy efficiency and carbon reduction plan and tabled as the latest public sector energy consumption report. Members will see in pages 10 and 12 of the table report that the total biomass consumption, including non-buildings, increased from 1011 to 1112, and renewables consumption fell in the same period. Now, if we could just go to page 102. I know the document itself, and I would like to thank Aidan for
getting it.
getting this to us, and the table papers as well. But it actually raises more questions than it provides us answers with. So it might be helpful if we could, at some other occasion, if Aidan could be with us, just to take us through the document. Certainly, I saw a lot of questions in it that really 85% and 15% appearing kind of was out of nowhere. And
It would be appropriate at some stage to request somebody from DFP to come to ask them some questions about it, about what they're going to do. Because all we keep getting told is DFP have responsibility for it. But
I don't know whether this document too has been shared with the Committee for Finance and Personnel. So if we could forward that over to the Committee for Finance and Personnel as well, agreed to do that, yes? Agreed? Aye, agreed. So in regard to your proposal, Phil, I think that would be helpful as well if we could get somebody along to talk to us about this, because we seem to be going round in circles and not really getting any answers.
Chair, as it is primarily a finance and personnel function, I would need to check if the Committee for Finance and Personnel is currently doing anything
Right, okay, we'll
on
do
this
that
first, and if they're content for
That's
the
grand.
Committee to follow that up.
Thanks, Jim. We'll do that. Next item is Renew Resource Innovation Network for European Waste. Page 126 is a written briefing from Renew on its project to increase cooperation between research and business to create value from waste. The committee had requested the written briefing following a request to orally present to the committee. Now, are we content to forward this written briefing to the Committee for the Environment? Okay, great. Next item is HSE Health, HSENI, Health and Safety Executive NI, scoping study to develop a set of supply use tables. The HSENI report has been sent to members.
Is he on here?
This is a document that has been sent to you. The HSE report, a set of supply use tables. Okay. So, unless anybody has any comment about the report, are we content to note? Agreed. Next item, one other item, the Green Investment Bank workshop. The committee is hosting a workshop with the Green Investment Bank on the morning of the 10th of June in the Long Gallery, and it's just to remind members to have it in their diary, please, because we've put a fair wee bit of effort into this, and I know there's a significant number of stakeholders been invited to it. It might be useful if we got some indication next week for our meeting of the list of stakeholders that had been invited. That would be very helpful.
What time is that at, sir?
It's the 10th of June, Gordon.
Yes, what time?
What have we got? 9:15. Okay. In the Long Gallery.
Good morning.
I will.
Thanks for taking note of those of us that travel today.
I have to do a wee bit myself. So.
You get out of it?
Is there half an hour drinking tea and chatting first? Like all these other
I don't know.
Opening remarks 9:45.
That's not too bad.
That's not so bad. Agenda item number 7, legislation, the draft renewables obligation amendment order, Northern Ireland 2014. Papers for this are included at page 137. Cover note 138, the draft SR and explanatory memorandum at page 139. The rule is subject to affirmative resolution. The committee has extensively considered this issue at length, and at its meeting on the 3rd of April 2014 considered the SL1 stage for the rule. We were agreed it was content with the proposal and the provision that it be reviewed in 12 months' time, and that the department has ensured and is satisfied that it isn't creating a monopoly position where the largest company states that can work within a 7% return on investment, but others believe a minimum 10% rate of return is required. The rule will come into operation on the 1st of June 2014, and to inform members that there are no changes to the policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the committee. The examiner of statutory rules hasn't yet reported on the statutory rule, but has indicated he has no points to raise in the draft statutory rule. So, if members are content with the SR, I have to put the following question: that the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment has considered the draft Renewables Obligation Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2014, SR 2014/00, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Now, presumably we haven't heard anything back from the department yet as to whether it's going to be reviewed in 12 months' time, or on the monopoly issue, Jim, have we? No,
Nothing has
yeah.
come back. Yeah.
but it's coming back. Okay, are we agreed to that? Agreed? Yeah. Agreed? Yes? Yes, I presume, members, yes?
All unanimous, Pat?
Great, yeah, great.
Aye, yeah.
Just want to get the indication, you know?
Do you want to take a written vote, like, just any doubts? No?
No, you know, you never know. I don't want to reopen that one. No, not today, anyway. Right, the decision will be relayed to the business office. In regard to agenda item number 8, correspondence then, Jim, if you could take us through that, please. That starts at page 154.
So the first thing is from Simple Power, submitting response to the Committee's electricity policy review. The note that Simple Power states in submission that companies in GB have adopted smart solutions to providing reasonable cost of connections to their 11 kilovolt networks and to congestion problems on the 33 kilovolt networks. Suggest to the committee that it might be worth getting some research on this here to ascertain where this has been done and what the benefits of it are.
Okay, great to do
Members are
that.
content.
Yeah.
And of course to consider the issues in this here when NIE and the utility regulator brief the committee as well.
Yep.
Second thing from the Ulster Farmers Union submitting a response to the committee's inquiry as well. And again, that's something to consider whenever NIE and the utility regulator brief the committee and of course DETI as well.
Agreed? Yep.
Great.
The next thing, Chair, is from the Ulster Farmers Union regarding ground-based solar PV and the impact on single farm payments. Chair, I think we had a discussion on this with the...
It certainly opened up a can of worms here, where
Yeah.
if you're disagreeing with what Dart's saying, you know, not that that's unusual, but I think this is one that we need to refer over to the Art Committee, and I've actually spoken to the chairperson there today. So if we're agreed to go that course of action, that it'd be further discussed at that committee.
Great, yes.
They notify us back as to what the conclusions are. Agreed?
Great.
Thank you.
Then from NIA, from the Northern Ireland Assembly and Business Trust, inviting members to meet a delegation from the Federal State of Berlin on Tuesday, 13th of May at 4 p.m. to discuss the committee's work. That's on page 172.
Okay.
So if members contact the committee office if they wish to attend that.
I wouldn't mind going along to that myself, if it's at all possible. So if you can pencil me in there, Angela, please, just. Okay.
Then from the Committee for Health, Social Services and Public Safety on its meeting with Biobusiness. If members have no comments, it's probably worth forwarding that to the Committee for Employment and Learning as it relates to skills.
Agreed? Yeah.
Great.
And from Power and I requesting a meeting with the Chair on the utility regulators consultation on the possible cancellation of the generating unit agreements, which are the legacy contracts, as were.
All right, there's the power station.
Yeah, so if members are content for the Chair and Deputy Chair to meet with Power and I.
Agreed?
Do you get a briefing from research on it as well?
Sure.
Then from First Flight Wind, providing an update on the offshore scoping report and delays in a geophysical survey. A copy of the report is in the committee office if members wish to see it, so if members are content to note that.
Great.
And then also to note is a copy of DETI's submission to CAL Committee inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities.
Noted.
Yeah.
From the Committee for Regional Development, including correspondence on the proposed power station at Larne, possibly refers to the energy storage facility.
Yes,
Would that be the case in Larne? If members have any comments on that or content to note?
Well, they've asked a number of questions there, Jim, and do we generally respond to them? What's it for?
Before you on Monday.
I've got an invite.
I don't even know if it's serious and well-founded concerns. Emissions, economic viability, renewable asset location and greenbelt. Quite a few of these are planning issues.
Bring the ribbon.
I just think somebody needs to respond to the woman in some way. Like.
Right. I think there's certainly issues there for DOE, for the Environment Committee.
Sorry, Chair, this is copied to this committee from the Committee for Regional Development.
Yes.
I better presume they're not going to deal with it, are they?
economic viability and renewable aspect.
Been replaced.
I really don't know how we can get into that. Economic viability for the noise, emissions, location in a green belt. If there is such a thing as a green belt around Larne anymore, it's probably EPS 21 territory.
12.
Battery storage at Kilroot. These are planning issues.
Yeah, I sort of assumed at the time it was copied to this committee for information, Mr. Chair.
Aye. Well, if we could maybe, can we just check if in fact it has been copied into the Environment Committee, please? Okay, agreed.
Yep, then from DRD on the proposed bus and coach passenger rights and obligations designation enforcement regulations NI 2014 at page 190. These regulations are primarily for DRD but will provide DETI with the statutory powers to deal with complaints arising from non-compliance by travel agents and tour operators. So if members are contented with that.
Great, good stuff.
Then there's correspondence from a member of the public regarding his correspondence to the Minister on planning applications for an explosive store associated with gold mining exploration site. That's at page 206. There's also correspondence to the Deputy Chair on this as well.
It's, again, this is a planning matter.
Primarily is a planning matter, Patsy, but some of the issues concerned relate to the Health and Safety Executive, and that's why that has been the only matters they're looking for this committee to deal with are the ones to do with ammunitions and explosives and stuff like that they feel should be a matter for the HSE.
Jim has said they've said it falls without their remit. It's explosives and ammunition storage is usually, I think, a policing issue. There's a section within police that deals with that, and presumably this would have gone through. It's primarily a planning issue. Jim advised me, Health and Safety have said that explosives and the likes that isn't a matter for them.
Well, who is it a matter for?
Just said police. There's
bound to be an executive agency or department that's responsible for it.
Aye, it's explosives branch in the police service.
Is there bound to be somebody in the DOJ dealing with it?
I honestly don't know.
Well, can we pass this on to the Justice Committee and see what the story is?
Okay. Agreed. All right.
Okay,
next item.
Sorry, Chair. From the National Museums of Northern Ireland inviting the committee to the 50th anniversary of the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum. The event is on Monday next, the 5th of May, so if members would contact the committee office if they wish to attend that.
Great.
And finally, from the RSPB, enclosing correspondence to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister regarding its concerns on the Rural Development Programme. That's page 112. So that's maybe members want to forward that to the.
I don't know how it's got to us, but
to OFM, the FM for comment.
20% meeting.
Better to OFM. It's for rural development programs.
They probably sent it in, Rhoda.
I probably have.
For the one aspect that does have an impact on agri-food schemes, is it?
Maybe.
Impact on the rural economy.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. Right. Sorry, what are we doing with that one?
Note.
Agreed. Right. Page 218. Here's the forward work programme, which we've already dealt with, the bulk of it anyway, earlier. It's from the 8th of May to the 3rd of June. It's at page 218. And so if members are agreed to the content of the proposed forward work programme, incorporating then the Invest NI trip to San Diego. Agreed?
Just on you mentioned the SDC trailers. Is that something that you want to go ahead on this evening?
Oh yes. The trip to SDC and my own constituency. So if that same week, if we could organise that.
26th of June.
26th of June. Okay. If members are happy enough to indulge me with that. Agreed then?
I will think about it.
Can I ask a daft question, Patsy?
Yes.
When are you planning to go to San Diego?
Fergal's going.
Aye, but if half the committee's going to San Diego, are you still going to have a meeting?
This would be a visit. but it won't be a
26th of
meeting.
June.
No meeting then?
No.
All right, okay.
Okay.
Furthest to travel your constituency or San Diego?
Oh well.
More votes. More votes in the SDC thriller office than there is in San Diego.
You said it, Phil. Correspondence regarding the trade mission. Well, we've already dealt with that. Okay. And agenda item number 10. Any other business? There being no other items of additional business. Okay. Now, if members are content to receive their packs for next week's meeting on Tuesday rather than Monday due to the bank holiday.
I will live with that.
Okay, we'll live with that, aye.
I will see.
And the next meeting of the committee will be on Thursday, the 8th of May, in room 30 at 10 a.m. Thanks very much, everybody.
Labor Day.
Thank you.